Welcome and settle in. Let your body relax and your mind begin to drift not forward, but backward, back through time. Past the hum of electricity and the glow of city lights, past clocks and calendars, past kingdoms and conquests, until you find yourself in a world shaped by stone and sun. A world where the rhythm of life pulsed to the beat of drums and the slow crossing of stars. Tonight, we journey to ancient Central America, the great cities of the Maya. Their temples still rise from the jungle, cradled by roots and silence. Their stories echo faintly in carved glyphs and shattered pottery. Their lives, once ruled by the gods in the sky, now rest quietly beneath vines in time. But within this quiet there was once motion. People moved deliberately beneath the heat, their days filled with ritual and meaning. Among them, one figure toiled more than most, neither warrior nor priest, but something in between. A scribe, a keeper of sacred time. You might imagine this life was peaceful, writing, studying, watching the stars. But the truth is, it was exhausting, demanding, sacred. Every mistake could ripple through a kingdom. Every word, every mark, every drop of blood had purpose. So close your eyes if you'd like, or let them rest half-lidded as we step into the stone courtyards and shadowed temples of the Maya. Let the distant sound howler monkeys fade. Let the jungle's breath surround you. And follow the soft scratch of a brush on bark paper. We begin with the scribes. Chapter 1. Scribing for the Gods. Imagine yourself waking before dawn, the stone floor cool beneath your feet, the air thick with the scent of copal incense and damp leaves. The sky is still indigo, scattered with stars, but already you rise. You are a scribe in the court of a Maya king, and time waits for no one, not even the stars. Your tools are humble yet sacred. A reed brush, a shell of ink, and folded sheets of amate bark. In the flickering torchlight of the temple chamber, you kneel before a slab of stone. Your task is to write. To record the calendar rounds, the births of nobles, the deaths of kings, the victories, the offerings, the omens. Each glyph must be perfect. A curl in the wrong direction, a line drawn too short, and the meaning changes entirely. You've memorized hundreds. Some take hours to inscribe. Others you learned only after fasting for days, eyes blurred by smoke, guided by a priest whispering the gods' names. As the sun climbs, so too does your labor. The heat presses down on your shoulders, sweat beads at your brow, but still you write. You dip your brush into pigment mixed from crushed insects and minerals, red for blood, blue for sacrifice, black for death or rebirth, it depends on the context. But it's not only ink that is required. Some days, when the omens demand it, you must offer more. A cut across the tongue with a stingray spine, blood dropped on paper and burned to smoke. This is not punishment. It is duty. Pain opens the way for divine vision. Or so you are told. You write on stone steely, so that your king may live forever in memory. You etch into jade and bone, paint on walls, transcribe on their folded codices. Your writing holds the story of the world, and yet your name is rarely recorded. By night, you are not always allowed rest. If Venus is to rise, you must be awake. If an eclipse is coming, you must chart it. Sometimes you stand on temple steps for hours, watching the moon crawl across the sky, calculating, measuring, not for curiosity but for survival. A mistake in your chart could be blamed for a failed crop or a stillborn heir. There's pressure, quiet, constant pressure. You are not a priest, but you bleed. You're not a warrior, but you bear wounds. You are not royalty, but you decide how time flows, when festivals are held, when wars begin, when the gods are to be fed. Your hand trembles by dusk, the brush slipping slightly. You steady it, a breath. Then another stroke, and so the day ends. Not with applause or recognition, but with fading torchlight, a stiff back, and a head full of glyphs. As you sleep, the stars continue their slow journey across the sky, and you'll be waiting again before dawn. The ceiba tree stands tall, its smooth, pale trunk rising straight from the courtyard, like a spine connecting the underworld, earth, and heavens. In the beliefs of the Maya, it is more than a tree, is the world tree, the axis of the universe, a sacred pathway for spirits to travel. Beneath its broad canopy, rituals unfold as if time has stopped. You can almost hear the rustle of the great leaves, the soft sigh of wind through the branches, and the low chant that begins just before sunrise. The courtyard is stone-lined and worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Scribes gather here, positioned on the periphery, kneeling on woven mats with inkstones and bark paper folded before them. They are not performers of the ritual, but chroniclers and visible presence with the grave responsibility of recording every movement, every spoken invocation, every twist of the priest's wrist, so that the ritual lives beyond its own moment. Their presence is silent, but their work eternal. The smell of burning copal fills the air, its sweet, heavy smoke drifting in blue tendrils toward the rising sun. The priest arrives, robes shimmering with jade beads and quetzal feathers that flutter as he walks. His eyes are already distant, locked into a rhythm known only to those who've memorized the complex cycles of the gods. With him come attendants carrying instruments, bowls of crimson pigment, obsidian blades, and bound scrolls. The scribe's hands hover above their parchment, waiting. A conch shell is blown. Its deep, echoing note signals the moment the ritual begins. It is not dramatic. There is no surge of energy, no music swelling to a climax. Instead, the ceremony begins like breath slow, deep, steady. The priest raises his arms toward the sipa, murmuring in a language older than the city itself. Birds fall silent. Even the wind seems to pause. Then comes the bloodletting. One by one, the priest and noble participants take a thorn or sharp obsidian shard and draw it slowly across skin tongue. Earlobe, thigh. The act is deliberate, almost serene, as if pain is irrelevant. The blood is not wiped away, but caught in bark paper or smeared directly onto sacred icons, which are later burned to carry the offering skyward. No one screams. No one recoils. This is a necessary act, a sacred one, to open the soul and feed the gods. Scribes do not flinch. They note the order of cuts, the direction of the wind, the time of day, the alignment of celestial signs. Their brushes move slowly, rhythmically, in long spirals and squares. Some scribes are former initiates themselves, having once drawn blood in this very courtyard. They know what it means to lose part of yourself to the sacred. Chanting rises, carried by low drums and bone flutes. The instruments echo through the open space, creating vibrations that pass through your skin more than your ears. Certain frequencies are believed to attract specific gods. One low tone calls on the underworld, another on the rain deity. Scribes note the sequence, the length of each chant, and the emotional tone, whether it stirred sorrow, strength, or submission. These ceremonies can last hours, sometimes days. Meals are taken in shifts, maize cakes dipped in honey, bits of roasted cacao bean. Small gourds of water pass from hand to hand. The scribes remain, always watching, always recording. A missed moment could mean a flawed record, and in Mayan tradition, flawed records can mean flawed outcomes. A misremembered chant could offend a deity. A missed offering might explain a failed harvest. Nothing is too small to write down. Even when the sky darkens and torches are lit, the rituals do not end. Some ceremonies mark the turning of the year, the closing of one era and the opening of another. The priest might climb a platform, fire held high, as offerings are thrown into sacred flames. Scribes squint through smoke, writing by the golden flicker of firelight, their shadows long and flickering on the stone walls. There is one moment, always, that tests the scribe's will. It comes when exhaustion settles deep in the bones, when the mind begins to drift from the drone of voices and the weariness of constant attention. The ceremonies do not pause for comfort. They do not slow for fatigue. The gods are eternal, and their worship must be as well. And so the scribes press on, ink runs low, fingers cramp. Still, they write. One of the rituals involves trance dancing. Dancers whirl in painted skins, their faces masked to resemble jaguars or serpents. They leap and crouch, embodying the gods themselves. It is said that these dances are not performances, but possessions. The gods move through human bodies, borrowing limbs and breath. The scribes must capture not only the movement, but the transformation writing, not that the priest danced, but that the rain lord walked the earth in borrowed form. Eventually, the dancers collapse. The music slows. The air stills. But the scribes remain at work, copying their drafts onto finer pages, sketching symbols with careful lines, murmuring the order of rituals one last time to ensure no moment was missed. These documents will be stored in temple chambers, read by future priests, consulted in times of drought or eclipse. The scribes know that long after their bones have turned to dust, their ink will speak for them. The night ends beneath the same ceiba tree. Smoke lingers above the altar stones. The final chant fades into silence, and in the pale moonlight, the courtyard looks abandoned. Only if you look closely can you see the last scribe still kneeling, eyes heavy, brush still in hand, finishing the final line. Eyes heavy, brush still in hand, finishing the final line. His posture is rigid with fatigue, but he will not rise until the page is complete. For a Mayan scribe, the act of writing is more than memory, is ceremony. His back straightens one last time. The ink now mixed slightly with sweat as he closes the folded codex and seals it with a clay stamp marked by the Gaia's date. A date not in our calendar, but one counted in cycles of backtons and catons, aligning the stars with divine intent. As the temple courtyard slowly empties, only faint footsteps echo across the stone. The rituals may have ended, but their energy remains hanging in the air like the last trace of incense, barely visible but deeply present. The ceiba tree above stands unchanged, indifferent. It has seen hundreds of such nights. Its roots stretch into the underworld, and its branches touch the skies where the gods dwell, silent witnesses to the rhythm of ritual time. Over time, the scribes will archive these writings within sealed stone chambers, or transcribe select portions onto walls and stele. Some glyphs are poetic, describing not just actions, but mood, divine will, and even shifts in the wind. Others are purely practical, lists of names, quantities of blood offered, the direction the priest turned before speaking the name of a god. These were not embellishments. These were instructions, possibly to be repeated centuries later. What may seem like excess, recording every flicker of flame, every drop of resin, is in fact the structure of Mayan sacred time. For the Maya, time was not linear. It was circular, sacred, and alive. If the exact conditions of the past could be recalled and repeated, the same divine outcomes could return. Repetition was not redundancy. It was a reenactment of cosmic harmony. The scribe understood this. That is why his brush did not stop, even as his muscles ached. That is why the ink continued, even when torches sputtered low. A mistake in the record was not a simple error. It was a fracture in the rhythm of the universe. Rituals beneath the ceiba tree were not always grand spectacles. Some were quiet, intimate affairs. A healing rite for a child, a naming ceremony at dusk. In these moments, the scribes were still present, crouched quietly near the altar, their inkstones cradled in smooth wooden trays. They recorded the sacred words spoken by elders. The shape of the offering, perhaps a handful of feathers or a carved jade bead, and even the mood of the animals nearby, for animals were messengers in Mayan cosmology. There were rituals for birth and death, marriage and divorce, planting and harvesting, eclipses and solstices. Each one carried meaning, not just for those involved, but for the balance of the world. And for each, the scribes worked, sometimes beside the ritual, other times behind a woven screen, unseen but listening intently. The gods needed to be honored, but they also needed to be documented. In some temples, scribes painted murals after the ceremonies were complete. These murals were not merely decoration, they were guides. Future priests would study the colors, the posture of the figures, the placement of each object in the scene. Everything had purpose. Even the background, painted in celestial blues or blood red, had symbolic weight. A wrongly placed foot or misdrawn god could disrupt the message of the mural entirely. As these murals aged, they darkened. Jungle humidity faded some glyphs, and moss crept along the base of stone walls. Yet the scribe's intention remained, embedded in every curve and symbol. Even now, centuries later, archaeologists decipher these records, their meanings unfolding slowly like a codex being carefully reopened after 1,000 years. Not all rituals were solemn. Some were festive. The arrival of rain after a long dry season would inspire a gathering children laughing, drums echoing, dancers in jaguar skins leaping beneath lanterns. But even in joy there was structure. Offerings were made, chants repeated, the gods thanked. And always in the corner sat the scribe, capturing each detail in lines of curling ink. On certain nights, the rituals blended with dreams. Long ceremonies would stretch into dawn, and the thin veil between the physical and the divine would begin to waver. Participants would enter trance states, often aided by fermented drinks or hallucinogenic plants. They would speak in voices not their own, They would weep, dance, or fall into silence. The scribes recorded these shifts, never judging, only documenting. One such night, described in a surviving codex, tells of a priest who spoke in a voice like wind through stone. He named stars not yet visible and predicted a flood 3 generations in the future. The scribe who recorded this did so in red ink, noting the change in the air temperature, the trembling of the ceiba leaves. To him, this was not madness, it was message. It's easy to imagine these moments as mystical, even theatrical. But for the scribes, they were deeply real. Exhausting, yes. Repetitive, certainly. But meaningful beyond words. To write was to give form to the divine. To transcribe was to stabilize the universe. Eventually the courtyard would empty entirely. Rituals would pause. Scribes would stretch their legs, rotate stiff shoulders, and gather their tools. But even in rest, their minds remained attuned to the next date, the next alignment, the next sacrifice. Their days were measured not in hours, but in ceremonies. And still the ceiba tree stood tall, branches reaching into the stars. Chapter 3. The Fall of Copen. Imagine standing on a stone terrace, high above a quiet city where the jungle has crept in like a gentle tide. Vines twist along temple walls, their leaves casting dappled shadows on glyph-covered stones. You hear no voices, no drums, only the occasional chirp of a tree frog, the breeze in the ceiba trees, and the distant cry of a howler monkey. This was once Copen, a vibrant center of art, astronomy, and royal power. Now, silence reigns. The city didn't fall in a day. It didn't burn in battle. It wasn't taken by plague. It simply slowed, then stopped. Copen was once among the brightest stars of the Maya world. Located in what is now western Honduras, it thrived for centuries, its plazas filled with life. It's steely carved with intricate stories of kings and gods, its astronomers carefully tracking the sky. The air once smelled of incense and ripe fruit. The courtyards echoed with laughter, ritual chant, and royal decree. At the city's heart stood temples and pyramids, their steps worn by the feet of priests, rulers, dancers, and scribes. These structures were layered over time-new temples built atop the old, each generation leaving its mark. Copen's kings were proud of this continuity, and their scribes took great care to etch every new achievement alongside the old. Their inscriptions do not speak of fear or threat. They speak of lineage, divinity, and tradition. And yet, by the late 8th century, signs of strain begin to appear. The glyphs record increasingly elaborate rituals, perhaps attempts to please gods who seemed suddenly distant. Offerings became grander, bloodletting intensified. Calendrical ceremonies grew longer, more urgent. It's as though the scribes were trying to write stability into existence. Archaeological evidence tells a quieter story. Soil samples suggest that the surrounding farmland had been overworked. Trees cleared, hills terraced, maize grown too often in the same plots. Slowly, the land began to resist. Yields shrank. Malnutrition crept into the population, not all at once, but gradually, like a drought that arrives without clouds. The people of Copen, like many Maya, depended on cycles of rain, sun, planting, and harvest. When those cycles faltered, everything else was threatened. The nobles still held their feasts. the temples still stood. But beneath the surface, cracks widened, and in time, even the scribes must have noticed. We can imagine one such scribe seated in a quiet chamber above the plaza of the hieroglyphic stairway. He dips his brush into deep blue pigment, glancing out at a gathering of priests below. Their chants are precise, rehearsed, but the crowd is smaller than last year. The plaza's edges are quiet. A child cries. A vendor has not returned. He looks down at the stone before him. Today's inscription will mark the celebration of a king's 20th year in power. The glyphs are beautiful, elegant curls and teeth-like strokes forming words of eternity. But in the back of his mind, the scribe wonders how long eternity really lasts. The ruling dynasty at Köpen reached its peak under a king named Uasaklajuan Ake, well known today as 18 Rabbit. His monuments are among the finest in the Maya world. Towering stelae depict him in elaborate headdresses, his face calm and powerful. He oversaw major building projects, including new temples and the expansion of the central court. Under his reign, the city appeared invincible. But appearances like stelae, weather with time. In the year 738, this powerful king was captured by a rival from a nearby city called Quirigua. Not only was he defeated, he was executed. This event was so unthinkable that scribes had to find a new way to record it. How does one explain the death of a semi-divine ruler? How does one fit defeat into a system built on continuity? It was a wound, not just to the dynasty, but to the very concept of time. Calendars had to be recalibrated, rituals adjusted, temples reoriented. The glyphs that follow grow quieter. Fewer stelae were raised. Construction slowed. Some buildings were never completed. Still, the city did not collapse, not immediately. Later kings ruled, though with less grandeur. The scribes continued to write, but with a sense of cautious formality. Festivals were still held, though sometimes the dance platforms were smaller, the offerings less rich. Slowly, the jungle began to press in again. The people adapted. New crops were introduced. Trade routes shifted, but something had changed. The center no longer held the same pull. What's striking about the fall of Köpen is not violence, but stillness. There is no record of siege or mass exodus. Instead, buildings were left unfinished. Staircases crumbled quietly. Stone altars grew moss. The scribes, once the keepers of sacred time, gradually stopped writing. Their ink dried. One of the last glyphs carved at Köpen does not speak of triumph or prophecy. It records a simple offering made by a minor noble on behalf of a god. There are no royal names, no sweeping declarations, just the act of remembrance. And then silence. And then silence. The stone cities that once bustled with ritual and record grew quiet. No war banners flew over the temples. No cries echoed from the ball courts. The vine simply returned, one leaf at a time, as if reclaiming what had been borrowed from the forest. The plazas no longer echoed with footfalls. And the scribes, once so meticulous, so tireless, laid down their brushes for the last time. Yet this silence is not the end of the story. What remains in Köpen today are echoes, murmurs in the stone, stairways covered in hieroglyphs, some worn smooth by rain, others surprisingly sharp, protected by fallen lintels. Among them, the hieroglyphic stairway remains one of those astonishing monuments of ancient writing. Over 2,000 individual glyph blocks climb its slope, recounting centuries of royal history. A timeline of the divine, set in stone. Archaeologists have spent decades trying to piece it together. Some glyphs were displaced during collapse or erosion. Others remain in sequence. Each one holds the weight of a life, a decision, a ritual, a star chart, a royal birth. These were not just names. They were fragments of a worldview. And so, even in abandonment, the voices of Copen whisper on. In the centuries after its fall, the city was not entirely forgotten. Local communities, descendants of the Maya, still lived in the surrounding hills. They remembered stories passed down in fragments of tall temples and sky watchers, of kings who spoke to gods. Occasionally, pilgrims returned to offer maize or flowers at old altars, even as roots cracked the flagstones beneath their feet. To the people who once lived there, the end of Copen may not have felt like collapse. It may have felt like retreat, like pulling back from a center that had grown too heavy. After all, time was circular to the Maya. Decline was part of the cycle, just as rebirth was. Perhaps they believed the city would rise again. Perhaps they still do. For modern archaeologists, understanding this quiet unraveling requires more than examining stones. It means studying pollen trapped in soil layers, which reveal what crops were planted and when they stopped. It means analyzing bones to trace malnutrition or disease. It means interpreting glyphs left incomplete, inscriptions that suddenly stop mid-line, as though the scribe had looked up and never resumed. There's one temple located near the central Acropolis where a chamber holds half-finished murals. The figures have outlines but no color. The background is blank. A jar of dried pigment was found nearby, sealed but unopened. It suggests the artist meant to return, but something stopped him. We will never know what. It is easy to romanticize lost cities, easy to imagine them as tragic victims of fate or hubris. But the truth of Copen's decline is quieter and more human. Soil exhaustion, political tension, shifting alliances, possibly drought, possibly the simple fatigue of a people stretched across too many expectations, and always the weight of time. For the scribes, this must have been particularly heavy. Their world was constructed through record dates, God's deeds. To lose the ability to write those down was to feel the world itself coming undone. One can picture an aging scribe, perhaps one of the last, sitting in a stone chamber surrounded by codices. The ink in his bowl has thickened. His brush is worn to a nub. He looks out the window and the temple courtyard is overgrown. No chants rise. No rituals begin. He opens a blank page, thinks but does not write. Perhaps there was nothing more to say. And yet, even as the city faded, the jungle preserved what was left. Roots may have cracked stone, but they also protected it from looters and storms. Canopies shielded murals from sun and rain. For centuries, Copen slumbered under green veils, until rediscovery came in the 16th and 19th centuries. Layer by layer. Today, to walk through Copen is to walk among ghosts, not of terror, but of time. You step over stones etched with dates no longer remembered, alongside carvings of kings whose faces now resemble the surrounding hills. The silence is total, yet full. A silence that hums with memory. And in that silence, the scribes live on. Their glyphs remain not just as records, but as voices. They speak slowly, softly, through stone and shadow. When you stand before the great stairway and run your fingers along its symbols, you're not just touching history, you're completing it. You are, in some small way, continuing what they began. Chapter 4. The Jade Death Mask, deep within the heart of a temple. Beyond narrow staircases and chambers lined with carved stone, there lies a tomb. The air here is still quiet as sleep. A thin film of dust rests across the floor, undisturbed for centuries. Light filters faintly through cracks above, catching the edges of painted glyphs on the walls. And in the center of the chamber, nestled within a bed of offerings, lies a single face. It is not a human face. Not exactly. It is a mask, made entirely of jade. The pieces are cut and polished into geometric shapes, fitted like puzzle fragments to create the serene features of a departed ruler. The eyelids are half-lowered, mouth set in quiet peace. The green stone glows softly in the low light, cool and eternal. This is no death mask of grief. It is not meant to mourn. It is meant to transform. In Mayan belief, death was not an end, but a crossing. A journey through the underworld, a place of rivers, trials, and gods, to be reborn as something more. The jade mask was part of that journey. To cover the face with stone was to preserve identity across lifetimes and to shield the soul as it moved between worlds. The tomb's occupant was likely a king, though his name has long been weathered away. His bones lie arranged with care, limbs crossed and hands folded. Around him are tokens for the afterlife: obsidian blades, polished shells, glyph-inscribed plates, and small sculptures of maize gods. A woven mat still lines the floor beneath his body, fibers long faded but still intact. The air smells faintly of earth and stone, ancient, undisturbed. Here time rests gently. But once this room was alive with ceremony. Imagine it, the burial procession winding down from the surface, each member of the royal court carrying an offering. The flicker of torchlight against painted murals. The low hum of flutes played in mourning, not for the end of life, but for the beginning of eternity. The priest, face painted in black, gently places the jade mask over the ruler's face, murmuring the sacred words that allow a soul to rise. A scribe would have been present, likely kneeling near the chamber entrance, brush poised, recording every detail, the time of burial, the names of gods invoked, the alignment of the stars overhead. Each item placed near the body would be listed in careful script meant to be read by gods, not men. And so, while the body remained still, the act of burial was not passive. It was performance, devotion, precision. The jade mask was not ornament. It was declaration. This was a being not lost, but reborn. Jade held special meaning for the Maya. It was rarer than gold, valued not for sparkle, but for its permanence, its color, its connection to life. Green was the color of maize, the sacred crop, the giver of life. To be buried in jade was to link oneself forever to growth, to divine sustenance. Some masks included not just eyes and lips, but entire glyphs, names, titles, phrases meant to guide or protect. Others bore no words at all, just calm, symmetrical geometry meant to represent ideal harmony. The jade itself came from distant mines, likely traded through hundreds of miles of mountainous terrain. Each piece carried not just beauty, but journey. Sometimes the masks were accompanied by jade beads placed inside the mouth. These were symbols of breath, of speech, of life force. For the Maya, the mouth was sacred. To place jade inside it was to offer the spirit a voice in the afterlife. Not all tombs were so grand, but this one, hidden beneath a massive pyramid, was meant to last forever. The pyramid above was built in layers, one atop the other. With each new ruler, a new platform was added. The tomb was sealed not with fear, but with reverence. Inscriptions along the stairway above hinted at the king's deeds, his victories in ritual ball games, his offerings at solstice festivals, his visions granted through sacred bloodletting. The scribes told his story not as a man, but as a bridge between worlds. Outside, life continued. Markets bustled, scribes inked codices, children played near temples. But beneath it all, this chamber remained silent, forgotten eventually, until rediscovered by archaeologists 1,000 years later. When the chamber was first opened in modern times, the team moved slowly, brushing away centuries of dust with feather-soft tools. What they saw was not decay, but order. The mask was intact, the bones undisturbed. Even the arrangement of the offering seemed deliberate, intentional, as though someone had stepped out of the room moments before, quietly closing the door behind them. To those who found it, the chamber was sacred. They did not touch the mask at first. They simply stood, breath held, gazing at the green glow in the half-dark. It was the face of a man who had not been seen in over 1,000 years. Yet his presence was still here. Not just in bone, not just in stone, but in intention. For the scribes who recorded his death, the mask was only part of the story. Their brushstrokes extended the ritual far beyond the chamber. Their records ensured the king's rebirth would ripple outward through generations, across time and into the stars. And still the mask lies there, cool, quiet, unchanged. Cool, quiet, unchanged. The mask lies where it was placed, untouched by time, preserved not by chance, but by deliberate design. The chamber's builders intended permanence. They layered stone above the burial, sealed the door with mortar, and carved no external markings to hint at what lay below. This was not secrecy born of fear. It was sacred silence, meant to last beyond memory. And it did. Outside, dynasties rose and fell. Temples were expanded, then abandoned. The jungle pressed inward. Birds nested where scribes once worked. But below it all, the king slept, his jade face bearing the same calm expression it had since the day of his death. Centuries passed. When archaeologists returned to study the tomb, they discovered that many of the burial practices followed patterns found across the Maya world. Other jade masks have surfaced, some in Palenque, others in Calakmul and Tikal. Each one offers small variations, different hues of green, slight differences in facial features, or in the number of inlaid stones. Yet the essence remains the same. Jade, always. The face, always serene. The message, enduring. One of the most remarkable aspects of these burials is how they combine the sacred with the scientific. Mayan scribes and priests were deeply knowledgeable in astronomy, mathematics, and calendrical systems. The very date of burial would have been chosen based on celestial alignments, perhaps when Venus rose in the east, or during a particular phase of the moon. This wasn't superstition, it was structure. A sacred logic underlying life, death, and the soul's progression. Inscriptions found near similar tombs refer to the flowering of kings, the moment they ceased to rule in this world and began their path in the next. The jade mask served not only as armor for the soul, but also as an invitation to the gods, a statement that the bearer was ready to ascend. Sometimes these tombs were revisited. A later ruler might open the chamber briefly to place additional offerings or to affirm a connection with an honored ancestor. In these cases, the jade mask might be adjusted or an inscription added to the tomb walls. But rarely, if ever, was the burial disturbed. Even in reuse, the sacred boundary was respected. And always the scribes would return to record it, carefully, reverently. The act of writing down a royal burial was as significant as the burial itself. Glyphs would be painted or carved in codices on stele or into temple staircases. They would include the date, the name of the deceased, their titles, and sometimes their deeds or relationships. Often, poetic phrases were used, "he who rose with the morning star," or "she who stepped into the water path." In these metaphors, we glimpse the Mayan view of death, not a fall, but a step, not an end, but a beginning. The mask was not a symbol of loss, but of continuity. Back in a tomb, other details emerge. Alongside the body, archaeologists found remnants of cloth, possibly the king's final garments. The fabric had long since faded, but beads and fastenings remained. There were feathers, now skeletal, and traces of red cinnabar powder brushed across the mask and chest. This red pigment represented life force and transformation, its vivid color meant to ignite the journey through the underworld. There were also bones of animals' parrots, perhaps jaguar claws, indicating these symbolic attributes the king hoped to carry into the next realm. All were arranged with care, like actors on a stage set for a final, eternal performance. What's fascinating is how little is known about the individual himself. His name may have been lost, or perhaps it remains encoded in glyphs yet to be deciphered. But his face recreated in jade has survived. And in that sense, he has achieved exactly what the ritual intended. He has become timeless. For the Maya, identity could be preserved through symbols. A name spoken aloud faded quickly. A name written down lasted longer. But a name embedded in ceremony, in glyphs and masks and sacred space, that name became part of the rhythm of the world. The scribes knew this. That's why they devoted themselves to the task, even in dim chambers with aching hands. The ink might fade. The city might fall. But the record, if protected, would endure. Today, the jade masks are kept in museums and preservation centers. Some have been reburied out of respect, others studied under microscopes. Yet even in glass cases under artificial lights, they emit a strange gravity. Visitors fall silent. Children stare. Cameras click softly. The atmosphere, even outside the jungle, carries something of the old reverence. It is not only beauty they hold. It is presence. To look into the eyes of a jade mask is to confront a version of eternity. Not a loud or overwhelming one, but quiet, calm, composed. The features are idealized, but not unreal. They suggest a person once loved, once powerful, now at peace. They offer no answers, only continuity. And always beneath the mask remains a human skull. Bone and jade. Mortality and meaning. The scribes who recorded these deaths may not have known us, but in writing, they reached for a reader beyond time. Perhaps they imagined gods, perhaps descendants. Perhaps they did not imagine us at all, but we are here, listening. And the mask still rests unblinking. A face from long ago, watching the silence. Chapter 5. Secrets of the cenotes beneath the dense green canopy of the Yucatan Peninsula. The ground sometimes opens not in destruction, but in invitation. These openings are not dry or hollow. They are filled with water, clear, deep, and impossibly still. The Maya called them Jonah or cenotes sacred wells, portals not only to the underworld, but to the gods themselves. To stand before one is to feel time slow. The water mirrors the sky above, forming a circle between two worlds. Trees lean over the limestone rim, their roots reaching downward as though trying to drink from the past. Birds call from the shadows. A dragonfly hovers, motionless, and far below, where light does not reach, the bones of ancient offerings rest quietly on the bottom. Not all cenotes were used the same way. Some provided fresh water for villages, sources of life in a landscape without rivers. Others were used for ritual. These were the sacred cenotes, located near great temples and ceremonial platforms. The most famous sits beside the towering structures of Chichen Itza, a wide and seemingly bottomless pool with sheer walls and green-tinged depths. This was not a place of recreation. It was a place of reverence. From carved walkways at the edge, priests and nobles made offerings, sometimes of flowers and jade, sometimes of living beings. Ceremonies were timed with celestial events. Solstices, equinoxes, eclipses. The stars above mirrored the mysteries below. When the world above felt unsteady, drought, famine, illness, offerings were cast into the cenote to restore balance. And always nearby stood the scribes. They recorded not just the act of offering, but its full context. The day's number in the sacred calendar. The constellation visible at twilight. The priest spoke an invocation, sometimes just a whispered name. These weren't casual notes. They were sacred records meant to document the moment in time when human and divine forces met at the water's edge. The scribes knelt on stone or perched near shadowed corners, writing on bark paper or even smooth stone slabs. They did not look away when the ritual intensified. They wrote faster, more carefully. Each drop mattered. Archaeologists have since explored the cenotes with divers, unspooling long lines into the depths, their lights dancing through murky green columns of water. What they find are not the remains of war or abandonment, but careful placement. Objects positioned purposefully. Bones nestled alongside jade beads, gold discs, carved obsidian, and figurines of gods. These were not careless discards. They were prayers. Among the most chilling and sacred discoveries are the remains of children. Young boys and girls, many between 6 and 12 years old, their bones bearing few signs of violence. The offering of children was not done with cruelty, but with reverence. The Maya believed that pure life could speak more directly to the gods. A child could cross into the spirit world more clearly than an adult. Their presence was not erased, it was transformed. The scribes did not embellish. They wrote what happened, carefully. They used formal glyphs, marking the event with ceremonial weight, the name of the child, if known, the noble family who offered them, the number of steps taken. The sound of the conch shell as the ritual began. It is said that some scribes wept while writing silently, their brush steady, their faces blank. In these moments, the act of recording was itself sacred. For the cenote was more than water. It was believed to be a doorway to Xibalba, the underworld. A realm not of fire or punishment, but of trials, riddles, gods with shifting faces. To drop an offering into its depths was to send it across that veil, to ensure it arrived safely on the other side. Some cenotes were decorated. Carved faces lined the walls, their mouths open in permanent chant. Others were hidden in the forest, known only to priests and high scribes. These remote cenotes were used for private rituals, moments when a ruler might ask the gods a question or beg for a vision. Offerings here were smaller, quieter, a single jade bead, a folded codex, a wisp of incense carried on the wind. The sound of these ceremonies was unique muted. Water absorbed sound. Voices soften near its edge. Footsteps echo faintly. The chanting, the flute, the rustle of robes, all subdued by the pool's deep silence. And always beneath the surface, the unknown waited. It is said that the surface would sometimes shimmer without wind, that the gods answered not with words, but with ripples. A priest might peer into the water, seeking visions. A noble might dream strange dreams after drinking from the Senate's edge. The scribes, ever observant, wrote these things down too quietly, noting that on the third day after the offering, the rain finally came. In times of drought, the cenote became a last hope. When crops withered and reservoirs ran dry, processions would gather musicians, dancers, elders, children. The air would be hot, the sky cloudless. People would come barefoot. Some carried offerings wrapped in cloth. Others came only to watch, to witness. The final moment came when the offering was raised high above the head, silhouetted against the sun. A name was spoken, a prayer murmured, and then, with the sudden stillness, the figure was released, falling downward into the green. Into the green, the splash echoed briefly, then faded. Ripples spread outward in perfect circles, touching the mossy walls and reflecting the sky above. For a moment, no one moved. The conch shell, once so loud, lay silent. The air seemed to hold its breath, and then the ceremony was over. The scribes, seated just beyond the sacred edge, lifted their brushes once more. The final glyphs were written slowly, deliberately. The date recorded, the name, if known, the nature of the offering, perhaps a small symbol for the type of weather present dry, with shifting wind, a note about the faces in the crowd. These were not poetic flourishes, but details meant to echo into the future, to inform the gods, or to guide those who might read the text long after the scribe himself had returned to the earth. Centuries later, archaeologists diving in the cenotes would uncover these same stories, but from the other side. The offerings lie suspended in the silt, settled into the limestone floor as gently as dreams. Jade beads, shaped into teardrops or crescents, shells from distant coasts, small wooden idols, preserved by the mineral-rich water, their features still visible. Human, bones fragile, scattered, still gently curled as if asleep. What is remarkable is not the presence of these objects, but their placement. They do not appear as if thrown, many rest upright or nestled in groupings. Some are likely tied together in bundles before being released. The descent into the cenote was as structured as the ritual above it, and for every artifact recovered, a silence remains of scribes whose writings have not survived, whose folded codices were burned or lost to time, whose ink faded beneath centuries of rain and vines. We must imagine their words now, but their presence lingers. In Chichen Itza's sacred cenote, divers have recorded dozens of skeletons. Some show signs of ritual paint. Others bear small carvings pressed into their ribs or pelvis, perhaps talismans tied during the final rites. Still, others were accompanied by ceramics filled with food or pigment nourishment for the journey, or for the gods who waited beyond. The scribes, watching these ceremonies unfold, understood their role clearly. They were not simply observers. They were vessels. Their recordings were extensions of the offering itself. A poorly written glyph was more than an error. It risked the effectiveness of the entire ceremony. The gods were not abstract. They listened, they watched, and they expected precision. Not all cenote rituals involved human offerings. In many cases, the ceremony centered around symbolic gifts. A carved stone frog for the rain god, a bundle of herbs for health, a figurine shaped like a mother holding a child, given in hope or remembrance. These were lowered into the cenote with care, tied to strings or vines, gently guided to the water rather than cast violently. The surface remained undisturbed even after the offering was made. There is a story told in glyphs found near a smaller cenote in the Puk region of a ruler who sacrificed his own crown, a carved jade diadem passed down through generations. According to the inscription, the kingdom faced a mysterious illness. Crops failed. Children coughed through the night. The ruler, in desperation, gave up the symbol of his own power, casting it into the sacred water in full view of his court. The scribes recorded the event with uncharacteristic emotion, referring to it as the humbling of the sun throne. No record survives to tell whether the illness faded. But the diadem was never seen again. Cenotes were, in a way, both beginning and end. The Maya believed that life came from these watery openings, and that it returned to them in death. Creation myths speak of gods emerging from the depths, carrying maize and fire. Death myths speak of the soul descending into water to reach the underworld's first gate. These beliefs were not conflicting. They were part of a circular rhythm, one of flow, return, and renewal. To the modern eye, the cenote may appear serene, beautiful. Even tourists swim where once the sacred was offered. Light filters in through limestone gaps, dancing across the water's surface. But if you dive deep enough, beyond the sun's reach, the silence thickens, the temperature drops, the clarity fades, and the past draws near. In these depths, the silt hides histories. Some will never be recovered, others wait patiently to be found. The bones do not speak, but the way they lie, the objects beside them, and the direction they face all whisper meanings. Not in sentences, but in arrangements. Ritual through placement. It is likely that many scribes stood here, generation after generation, before this very pool. They wore robes of woven cotton, their faces painted in ochre or black. Some had ink-stained fingers. Others bore old scars from past rituals. All held the burden of translation between the human and the divine, between act and memory. We do not know their names. Their codices are gone, but they left behind what mattered most: form. Intention, precision, the feeling that the world, when properly recorded, could be made whole. And in this way, the cenotes remain alive, not just through the water or the offerings below, but through the silent presence of those who bore witness, the scribes, still kneeling, brush in hand, still listening to the quiet fall of water. Chapter 6. The Astronomer's Curse Before the First Light of Dawn. When the jungle is still wrapped in dew and silence, a scribe climbs the narrow stairs of a temple observatory. His sandals scuff softly against the stone. In one hand, he carries a bark paper codex, folded tightly and bound in string. In the other, a polished obsidian disc, used not for vanity, but for precision. His eyes are still heavy from lack of sleep, but he climbs anyway. The stars will not wait. At the top, the wind is cool and high. The canopy stretches like a dark ocean below. He kneels beside a stone alignment marker, a low, carved slit in the wall that opens to the eastern horizon. It frames a narrow band of sky just wide enough to track a specific star or the crest of the sun as it breaks the edge of the world. The scribe, though still called such, serves a special role. He is the royal astronomer. Among the Maya, astronomy was not a field of curiosity. It was a sacred obligation. The movement of the heavens governed every aspect of life. Marriage dates, planting seasons, wars, coronations, and burials, all timed with celestial events. The gods lived among the stars, and their moods could be read in the arc of Venus. The darkening of an eclipse, the first rains after a solstice, and it was the astronomer's job to interpret those moods, to predict, to warn to align human time with divine time. It was an honor, yes, but also a curse. The codex he holds is filled with cycles, mathematical patterns of days, moons, planets. The Maya counted time in multiple layers. The 260-day Zucken, the 365-day Hab, the long count for history, and lunar cycles for omens. Each system overlapped, creating moments of particular power dates that came rarely, sometimes only once in a lifetime. To miss such a moment was to invite disaster. So he watches, he tracks, and he worries. The observatory he works from is no simple structure. It is aligned with care. Slits in the walls frame the rising and setting of Venus during its major cycles. Carvings along the stairway correspond to equinoxes and zenith days. Even the shadow of the building at noon can offer clues, casting serpentine shapes across its balustrades, reminders of the feathered serpent god, Kukulkan. Each observation must be recorded, but not just recorded, interpreted. A blood-red moon might mean drought. A late sunrise might signal conflict. The reappearance of Venus as a morning star particularly ominous. Maya myths tell of Venus as a warrior, returning to the sky to punish the unprepared. The astronomer must therefore advise caution, fasts, sacrifices, and if he is wrong, then fields might wither, enemies might attack. A child born under the wrong alignment might grow ill or die. And though the gods cannot be blamed, the astronomer can. Some were punished harshly. Fingers broken, eyes damaged, symbolic injuries meant to mirror their failed role. There are glyphs that suggest certain astronomers were ritually blinded after incorrect predictions. Their sight taken so they might see better in the afterlife. It is no wonder that many worked in solitude, high above the city, far from the noise of markets and processions. Up here, the only company was the night sky and the quiet sound of brush against paper. Still, despite the weight of expectation, the astronomers persevered. They developed methods of astonishing accuracy. They calculated solar eclipses to the day. They knew the lunar cycle's exact length. They tracked Venus over years, charting its 584-day journey with almost perfect consistency. They could identify constellations, though theirs differed from the ones known in the West. The sky was filled not with bears and lions, but with parrots, serpents, and gods. The scribe watches as a star rises over the horizon, just where he expected. He breathes out slowly, notes the angle, and draws a line in his codex. His ink is made from soot and honey, fine enough to draw hair-thin strokes. The paper absorbs it cleanly. Another successful mark. Another thread pulled tight in the weave of cosmic balance. But not every night brings clarity. Some skies are obscured by cloud. Some stars appear late or early. The heavens are not always predictable. And when they deviate, the astronomer must decide, is this a natural variation or a divine message? That's the curse. For every chart is a story, and every story carries consequence. And in the Maya world, consequence always seeks a body to land on. There is one recorded event, a solar eclipse that came 2 days early. The court astronomer had predicted it for a festival. The ritual had already begun when the shadow swept across the sky. Panic followed. Some thought the gods were angered. Others blamed a rival city. The astronomer offered his life in apology, and the court accepted. His codices were burned, his name erased. But the date was still carved into the temple mark, not in triumph, but in warning. That night, another scribe began a new codex. Quietly, carefully. The curse did not end. It only passed on. The curse did not end. It only passed on. And so the next astronomer ascended the temple stairs. He did not speak of his predecessor. He did not question the ritual. He only carried his tools. His codex, his brush, his knowledge. The stars were still above him, unchanged. And yet, everything had changed. It is in this way that Mayan knowledge endured. Not through grand proclamations, but through quiet continuance. Each astronomer inherited the charts, adjusted the alignments, tracked the movement of the heavens with trembling precision. They worked in the shadow of punishment and the light of divine expectation. And always they recorded. Today, remnants of these codices are scarce. Most were lost, burned during conquests, dissolved by rain, eaten by insects. But the few that survive revealed the depth of Mayan astronomical understanding. Tables for eclipses, calendars for Venus and Mars, diagrams of lunar phases. The pages, made from bark coated in lime, unfold like long sacred scrolls, each one a map not of geography, but of time. One such codex, now preserved in a climate-controlled case, contains a Venus table. It marks the appearance, disappearance, and reappearance of the planet with astonishing regularity. It's thought to have guided not only agricultural schedules, but state policy dictating when war should be waged or avoided. Imagine the pressure. A ruler stands in his court, surrounded by nobles and priests. He turns to the astronomer and asks, "When will Venus rise again?" The astronomer bows, opens his codex, and names the date. Years may pass, but when that morning arrives, when the first glimmer appears in the eastern sky, every eye turns to the horizon. And if it does not come, that weight falls silently on the scribe's shoulders. Still, failure was rare. These were not guessers. They were mathematicians, scientists, observers. They understood cycles so long that few today would have the patience to calculate them. The calendar round, the long count, the lunar series, each a layer of time spiraling around the others. Like gears turning within a greater mechanism, but these gears did not only track stars. They track people, events, fates. Inscriptions on temple walls often begin with dates painstakingly calculated positions in the calendar that locate an event within cosmic time. A king's birth, for instance, might be recorded as happening on 9 Ajah, 3 Mac, aligning not only with earthly time but with celestial balance. That alignment would inform his destiny, his name, even the timing of his rituals. It would become part of who he was. Astronomers determined that alignment. Thus, they did not only observe the heavens, they shaped the earthly order. The scribe who miscalculated an eclipse might doom a harvest. But the one who aligned a coronation with the exact zenith passage of the sun might ensure decades of prosperity, or at least that is what the people believed. And belief in this world was as powerful as truth. There's something tender in this burden. These astronomers lived largely alone, their work too intricate to share easily. Their companions were shadows, stones, and stars. Yet they carried the fates of cities in their hands. Imagine one such astronomer aged now, his hair streaked with gray, his codex growing thick with annotations. He stands atop a stepped temple, waiting for the moon to rise at a particular angle. The wind rustles the canopy below. A torch flickers beside him. He leans forward, narrowing his eyes, and just before midnight, the moon appears exactly where he expected. He smiles faintly, not from pride, but relief. Another page may be written. But this work was not always solitary. At major courts like Palenque or Yaxchilan, astronomers worked in teams, passing knowledge from mentor to apprentice. Glyphs found in elite structures describe keepers of time, masters of cycles, and sky readers. Some even depict these figures seated beside kings, offering counsel. Their clothing was simple, but their status was high. In art, they are often shown holding measuring rods or codices, pointing toward glyphs in conversation with rulers. Their knowledge was both feared and revered because it touched the eternal. One monument in Copen shows a royal astronomer kneeling before the king, presenting a codex during a solstice ceremony. The ruler holds a staff, but his gaze is turned toward the scribe. It is a moment of rare humility, a king waiting for the stars to speak. And speak they did. Every 520 years, the major calendars aligned in a rare moment of cosmic resonance. Such moments were called period endings, powerful days when entire cities pause to reflect, build monuments, and recalibrate their sense of time. The scribes would prepare for years in advance. Observatories were cleaned, codices copied, glyphs carved in advance, and when the day came, the ceremony was vast, slow, solemn. Torches lit, incense burned, a hush fell over the plaza. And then, beneath the stars, a single astronomer stepped forward, named the day. The gods had returned. In our time, the stars still move in the same rhythms. Venus still follows her path. The sun still returns to the zenith. But the scribes are gone. Their codices, for the most part, turned to dust. And yet, their work endures, in every monument aligned to the heavens, in every glyph marking a sacred date, in every temple where light filters through a stone corridor only once each year. The astronomer's curse was also their gift, to make time visible, to write its rhythm into the bones of the world. And so we look up, even now, tracing paths across a dark sky, still wondering, still counting, still waiting for light. Chapter 7. Life in the Royal Court. The royal court of a Mayan city was not built on size, but on symbolism. It was not always vast in scale, yet every stone, every step, every glyph carved along the walls held the weight of the cosmos. The king did not sit atop a throne merely for comfort or spectacle. He sat as an axis, a living pillar between the sky and the underworld, a human bridge between the gods and the people. To walk into the royal plaza was to enter a world thick with color, texture, sound, and ritual. The ground beneath your feet would have been swept clean, yet patterned with shadows from fluttering banners overhead, red and green, yellow and blue woven from dyed cotton, and hung from poles carved with serpents and maize gods. The air carried the sharp scent of burning copal, rising in ribbons toward the sky. Somewhere in the near distance, a marimba struck a slow rhythm, and always the court scribe stood nearby, quiet, watchful, recording. The king appeared not as an individual, but as an embodiment. He wore elaborate headdresses of quetzal feathers, often reaching several feet high, swaying gently with each step. His cloak, made from jaguar pelts or embroidered cotton, shimmered with jade beads. Sandals bore the shape of cliffs, and his face painted in red or black reminded all who looked that he did not belong wholly to this world. Beside him stood his advisors, nobles of lineage, priests trained in calendar and sacrifice, warriors draped in trophies of past battles. And among them, sometimes behind a screen, sometimes kneeling in the open, sat the scribes. They held folded codices, inkstones, and slender brushes. They listened to everything. They recorded not only what was said, but how it was said, tone, posture, timing, response. Royal court life was built on rhythm and omen. A decision was rarely made in haste. The king, before speaking, would often consult with a priest or scribe. A recent dream might need interpreting. A solar event might hold deeper meaning. Even the direction in which a messenger entered the plaza could signal good or ill fortune. The court was not just political, it was spiritual, architectural, temporal. Scribes played a delicate role in this environment. They were not nobles, but they wielded power. Their words could shape memory, preserve honor, or quietly erase it. If a speech displeased the gods or the people, it could be softened in glyph. A poor omen could be deferred to a later reading. A failed crop might be blamed on the cycle of Venus, rather than on poor policy. The scribe wrote not just facts, but continuity. Court rituals were frequent. Bloodletting, particularly by the king himself, was public and ceremonial. With a stingray spine or obsidian shard, he would draw blood from the tongue, the thigh, or the earlobe. This act was not cruelty. It was a demonstration of strength, of devotion, of connection to the gods. The blood would fall onto bark paper, which was then burned, the smoke rising as offering. Scribes noted the exact time, the number of cuts, the position of the sun, the expression on a king's face. Some scribes included drawings, not of the act itself, but of the symbols that followed: serpent gods appearing in smoke, ancestors speaking from the void. Meals in the royal court were no less symbolic. Cacao, frothed and flavored with chili or honey, was served in carved vessels. Tamales wrapped in banana leaves. Maize porridge scented with flowers. Every dish carried meaning. Cacao, for instance, was considered divine food, consumed only by nobles and gods. Scribes sometimes recorded banquet menus, noting who received which food and in what order. Such records served as more than curiosity. They reflected status, favor, and lineage. The tone of court life shifted with the seasons. During planting and harvest, rituals emphasized fertility in earth. During eclipse seasons, they turned inward, focusing on purification, introspection, and protection. Each shift brought new ceremonies, new edicts, and new stories to be recorded. The scribes worked continuously, adjusting their ink to reflect not just events, but atmosphere. Occasionally, the court would receive visitors. Foreign nobles from distant Maya cities, Palenque, Calakmul, Caracal, would arrive with gifts: jade, obsidian, exotic feathers, or slaves. Diplomacy was wrapped in theater. Speeches were made, offerings were exchanged, and beneath it all, scribes captured every phrase, every subtle movement, a glance too long, a hand that trembled, a gift refused. The glyphs told more than the surface. One codex fragment describes a moment when the visiting lord presented a jaguar pelt of extraordinary size. The king accepted it without rising from his throne. A pause followed too long, perhaps. The visiting lord's eyes dropped, and the scribe's brush recorded the gesture as the moment the flower wilted in shadow. A quiet record of tension, a diplomatic wound etched in poetry. Even joy in the court had structure. There were festivals with music, dance, and contests. The Maya ball game, Pok Tapak, was played not merely for sport, but as cosmic reenactments, sometimes with ritual stakes. Winners might be celebrated. Losers, on rare occasions, sacrificed. The court watched from shaded platforms. Scribes again noted everything: the names of players, the final score, the celestial alignment overhead. The game was never just a game, and throughout the palace complex, murals bloomed. Corridors painted with scenes of creation, conquest, rebirth. Scribes helped design them, selecting which events to immortalize, which faces to include, which glyphs would remain legible long after the city had faded. In this way, the court extended beyond the present. It lived in stone and color. It lived in ink. It lived in ink. In the calm moments between ceremonies, the palace quieted. The wind would stir through open corridors, rustling feathered banners. Stone pools reflected the sky. A servant might pass silently with water or a folded garment. The court scribes, even in these lulls, remained at their posts revising scrolls, organizing records, or copying codices. For them, there were no idle hours. Every day produced something worth preserving. Some scribes focused solely on calendrical updates, tracking shifts in the token and hab, ensuring the next ritual aligned with the divine count. Others were assigned to individual nobles, chronicling their achievements, births, dreams. Scribes were trusted not only with facts, but with secrets. A whispered illness, a quiet betrayal, a forbidden offering made by torchlight. These might never be spoken aloud again, but the scribe's record endured. It was not unusual for scribes to be present at royal births. A priest would announce the child's arrival with sacred language, and the scribe would record the exact moment of emergence. This time, this breath would be translated into glyphs binding the newborn's fate to the stars. Later, the name would be chosen based on the child's day sign, perhaps 5 gain or 9 baits, and the scribe would inscribe it into the family lineage. Even in death, the scribe stood close. Royal funerals were ceremonial and quiet. The body, wrapped in cloth and adorned with jade, would be carried through the palace one final time. Music played, a slow, pulsing rhythm from drums and turtle-shell instruments. The scribe followed behind, recording the names of those who attended, the offerings placed, the final words spoken at the tomb. Sometimes, a separate codex was made just for the dead. Folded pages filled with prayers, omens, and poems. The book would be buried alongside the ruler, meant as a guide through the underworld. The scribe's brush in these moments became a compass. Palace architecture itself reflected the hierarchy and thoughtfulness of court life. The king's chamber faced east, so that he might greet the sun. Audience halls were arranged to funnel sound, allowing voices to carry clearly during pronouncements. Courtyards echoed with precise acoustic properties, designed not for volume, but for clarity. And along the walls, panels of glyphs told stories. Some stretched the entire length of a corridor. Others were placed discreetly at doorways or window frames. These glyphs were not casual. They were chosen, crafted, placed with intention. A visitor might walk the hall of ancestors, reading the deeds of past kings in quiet awe. A noble woman might pass beneath the image of her father's triumph on the battlefield. A child might trace the curves of their name carved above a stone basin. In this way, the court was more than a place, it was a library. The scribes maintained that library. They repainted faded murals, re-inked codices, carved new stele when victories were won. Each act of maintenance was sacred. If a glyph began to chip, it was not merely a blemish. It was a breach in memory. Repairs were done with reverence. Occasionally, mistakes crept in, a line written too quickly, a glyph drawn too narrow. In these cases, the scribe would consult a senior. Corrections were made carefully, not by scraping away the ink, but by layering it, adding context, adjusting the narrative. Even in error, the Maya sought harmony. Court gossip, too, found its way into the margins. A passing note about a noble's hesitation, a curious alignment of dreams among the priesthood. Scribes rarely judged, they observed. They recorded. Their codices offer us not only the official story, but the whispered one. At the end of each moon cycle, court scribes presented their work to the royal council. The king himself might listen, or he might send a proxy. The scribes would read aloud selected passages, ritual records, omens, reports of distant trade. Their voices were steady, formal, almost melodic. It was not performance, it was offering. Language turned sacred. When the recitation ended, the codices were folded, bound, and stored in protected chambers, cool, dry rooms with stone shelves and sealed doors. Torches were kept far from them. Water vessels sat nearby to maintain balance in the air. These libraries, though lost to time, once held hundreds of books. Not just myths, but treaties, tribute lists, star charts, and ceremonial scripts. Some scribes were honored for their longevity. Their hands, worn with ink, their vision slightly dimmed, they still copied glyphs with reverence. They trained apprentices, passed on brush techniques, shared stories of old kings long past. Their wisdom was quiet, but respected. Their role, humble but essential. And so the royal court beat like a heart, not in chaos, but in ritual rhythm. Every decision aligned with the stars. Every step echoed with purpose. And every moment was watched, interpreted, and written down by those silent figures in the background. The scribes. Without crown or title, they held the memory of the kingdom. They stood at the edge of power, always listening. And when the city fell silent, when the last king's voice faded from the plaza, it was the scribe's brush that lingered, making one final mark. Chapter 8. The blood staircase stone steps rise in silence beneath the canopy. Their edges are worn smooth by centuries of feet, rain, and ritual. But among the moss and the fallen leaves, faint stains linger, iron-dark patches where time has not fully erased what happened here. This is not just a staircase. It is a path of offering, of transformation, of blood. The pyramids of the Maya were not merely temples. They were altars, stage, tomb, observatory, and shrine combined. Each level ascended brought one closer to the sky, to the gods above. And in climbing, something was always left behind. Breath, fear, pain. These were not casual climbs. On certain days, they were climbed with purpose, and not everyone returned. At the base of one such pyramid, its name now lost, stands a wide platform, once used for gathering. From there, hundreds would have watched as the high priest ascended the stairway. Slowly, steadily, his robe fluttering behind him like smoke. Behind him followed the ruler, his hands raised in prayer, his arms adorned with jade cuffs. And behind them the scribes. The scribes remain lower on the staircase, not to be excluded, but to see. From their position, they could witness both the ritual and the response. Their brushes were ready. Their codices open. They wrote not only of the gods above, but of the people below, their silence, their murmurs, the collective breath held at the moment of offering. Bloodletting was not hidden. It was not seen as shameful, but as sacred. The gods had given blood to form the world. In return, the Maya gave theirs back through ritual, through discipline. On the staircases, especially during major celestial alignments, rulers bled publicly. The higher they climbed, the more sacred the act. At the midpoint of the staircase was often a small platform, flat, clean, ringed with glyphs. Here the ruler would pause. With a stingray spine, obsidian blade, or sharpened bone, he would draw the blade across his flesh, not for spectacle, not to punish, but to speak, to open a portal through the body. Blood was language, and the gods listened. The paper strips used to catch the blood were often burned immediately. Their smoke carried messages upward. Sometimes, in the curling incense and ash, priests claimed to see visions, gods, ancestors, beasts with human eyes. The scribes recorded these visions as they were described, drawing them in shorthand and later expanding them in murals or codices. The stairs ran red, not all at once, but in small, careful offerings. Each drop was precious, each movement deliberate. When a ruler completed the act, he would rise not weak, but elevated, not diminished, but purified. His face might pale, his breath slow, but he would finish the climb. At the summit waited the offering, stone flat, cool, shaped like a turtle shell or serpent's back. There the ruler would kneel, or in some cases lie briefly while priests recited sacred passages. These were moments of transformation, not death, but ritual rebirth. The scribes below would note the exact position of the sun, the shadows cast by temple spires, the alignment with Venus or Mars. These details mattered. The Maya believed that every action echoed, that an offering given at the wrong time could cause imbalance, that a word spoken without alignment could fall unheard. The staircase was not just physical, it was temporal, a corridor of layered meaning. In later times, the stairs were used for more than symbolic bloodletting. Captives, often from rival cities, were led up the steps under guard. They were painted blue, a color associated with sacrifice. Their faces were calm or terrified or dazed. At the summit, their hearts were offered to the gods, and the blood ran downward, marking the stairs in long, slow ribbons. Scribes did not look away. They wrote quickly, capturing names, origins, omens. In some cases, they etched the moment in stone panels, showing stylized versions of the sacrifice, not with gore, but with symbolism. Serpents devouring suns, flowers blooming from skulls, water pouring upward from hearts. These were not meant to terrify. They were meant to explain, to order the chaos of life and death into a cycle that made sense. Over time, the blood darkened the steps. Not permanently, rain and time did their work, but traces remained. The scribes began referring to such staircases in code: the red ascent, the mouth of the east, the path of sacrifice. These were not metaphors. They were physical places, climbed by real people, written into real books. One inscription from a city now lost describes a day when 3 rulers from allied cities gathered to perform a joint offering. They ascended 3 separate staircases at dawn, each carrying a blade wrapped in maize leaves. As the sun rose, each bled in unison. A great cry rose from the crowd below, not of fear, but of awe. The scribes wrote, and the sun saw them and was fed. It is hard now, standing at the base of these same pyramids, to imagine such scenes. The jungle is quiet, birds chatter, tourists speak in hushed voices. But the stairs remain, worn but intact, and in their angles, in their steady rise, in the silence that falls near dusk, you can still feel it. A weight, not oppressive, but deep. A memory settled into stone. The steps of the pyramid no longer shine with fresh paint, and the blood is long washed away, but the intention remains. You can see it in the symmetry of the architecture, in the channels carved for ritual water or something else to flow downward. You can sense it in the way the air still stills near the top, as if waiting for something. The scribes knew that stairs, more than walls, were the true record keepers. Every ascent had meaning. Every descent left echoes. They described them in glyphs not only as physical spaces, but as metaphysical corridors, the ladder between breath and flame, the tongue of the sky god, the great descent of memory. To walk those steps, especially during ritual, was to move between worlds. Even when no blood was spilled, the stairs held power. New kings ascended them to take their thrones, each step heavy with the memory of ancestors. Children walked behind their mothers during festivals, lifting baskets of offerings. Warriors climbed barefoot, carrying tokens of recent victories. And scribes, they climbed too, sometimes just high enough to see, other times farther, to document a particular celestial event, but always with reverence, always with purpose. There is one recorded ritual described in a codex fragment from the Petan region, in which a queen performed her own bloodletting on the staircase's midpoint during the dry season. She was accompanied by singers and a line of torchbearers. As her blood was drawn, she raised her hands and spoke the name of an ancestor whose voice had been lost in time. The scribe who recorded the event wrote that the torches flickered against the temple wall as if they were stars struggling to stay in the sky. Such poetic turns were not common, but they were not forbidden either. Some scribes added flourishes to their descriptions, not to embellish, but to guide the reader's mind toward the feeling of the moment. These were acts of devotion, no different than the rituals themselves. In the margins of court records and bloodletting chronicles, you sometimes find these gentle additions, a flower drawn beside a heart symbol, or a curling line meant to show smoke or song. Glyphs, when written with intention, became more than words. They became echoes, and echoes matter, especially in a world where history was cyclical, where time folded back upon itself, where the past was not gone, it was just waiting to be reborn. The blood staircase was not about death. It was about continuity. The same acts, repeated at the right times, under the right stars, could renew balance, could call rain, could strengthen the corn, could speak to the ancestors. Over time, as dynasties weakened, the stairs changed. Some were no longer cleaned after ritual. Moss grew thick in the corners, cracks appeared. Offerings became fewer, more desperate. A rain god statue at the summit might remain untouched for seasons. Still, the scribes wrote. Still, they climbed. Even when the king grew sick, even when no crowd gathered below, the ritual had to be marked. Because if it wasn't recorded, it might as well not have happened. That was the burden of the blood staircase and of those who kept its memory. In some cities, when the end grew near, rulers carved their names directly into the staircase steps. Each ascent became a record. I climbed, one glyph reads, and the gods still watched. Another says simply, blood was taken and still no rain. These glyphs are harder to see now, worn by time and footsteps. But with careful eyes and angled light, they emerge again like truths resurfacing after centuries. Today, some of these staircases are roped off. Others remain open to climb. Tourists step where kings once bled, where scribes once crouched, brush in hand. The heat is still there. The rise is steep. And at the top, you still feel a shift, a hush, a pause, a view not just of the jungle, but of something older. A system of meaning that once infused every stone with breath. There is a notion in Mayan belief that sacred spaces remember. That temples, pyramids, even staircases, especially staircases, are not passive. They listen, they absorb, they wait. And one day, when the stars return to the right place, the rituals will resume. Not in the same way, but in echo. In intention, the blood staircase does not demand fear. It demands presence. To stand upon it is to be reminded of weight not physical, but temporal. Of a people who believe so deeply in their place in the cosmos that they shaped mountains to reflect it. Who offered pain not to glorify it, but to balance the world. Who recorded it all with ink on paper that barely survived, yet still speaks. The scribes, again, were there for all of it. Their words became the steps between generations. Their records were not just accounts of ritual, they were rituals in themselves. When they wrote of the blood that fell, they were not fixated on the wound, but on the meaning, the alignment, the intention. And when the scribes themselves passed, some were buried beneath the staircases they once watched. A few have been found bones wrapped in cloth, with inkstones placed at their feet. A single brush, made of bird bone and hair, tucked beside the ribs. No grand tomb, no mask of jade. Just a place beneath the path of sacrifice, the place where memory was made. And now, as the jungle presses in again and the light shifts through the trees, the stairs remain. They no longer flow with blood, but they hold something deeper. They hold the rhythm, step by step, glyph by glyph, always rising. Chapter 9. The ball game of fate in the heart of every great Maya city. Framed by high stone walls and sloping platforms, lay the ball court. A space neither entirely ceremonial nor entirely recreational. It existed in a category all its own. To enter was to step into a myth, a story retold not in words, but in motion. The court stretched long and narrow, with smooth limestone walls angled inward like wings. Markers carved with glyphs and imagery, sun symbols, serpent coils, divine faces, lined the stone. At either end, wide rings made of carved stone hung high, daringly out of reach. These were not goals in the modern sense, but cosmic targets meant more to represent than to score. The game played here, often called Pakta Pak, was more than a contest of skill. It was a reenactment of creation, a living echo of the myths in which twin brothers descended into the underworld to challenge the gods in their own arena. Victory, in these stories, brought rebirth. Defeat brought death and transformation. As dawn broke over the city, the court filled with anticipation. Not noisy cheering, but a dense, silent focus. The king arrived first, ascending a viewing platform adorned with masks of the sun god. Behind him came priests and scribes. And finally the players. They entered from opposite ends, dressed in padded garments, leather wrappings over hips, knees, and elbows. Their faces were painted, their expressions unreadable. Each team consisted of 2 to 4 men. Depending on the occasion, they carried no weapons. The only object was the ball itself, heavy, made of solid rubber, often weighing nearly 10 pounds. The rules were simple in concept. Keep the ball in motion using only the hips, elbows, knees, or chest. No hands, no feet. The ball must bounce, always bounce, and, if possible, pass through the stone ring mounted high on the wall. But the deeper rules, the ones that mattered, were embedded in the calendar, the omens, the alignment of planets. Some games determined the fates of nobles. Others echoed the movements of celestial bodies. The scribes were never far, stationed at the base of the viewing platform or beneath a shaded portico. They recorded every play, not with diagrams, but with glyphs denoting turning points, who struck the ball, the direction it moved, the alignment of the sun. They noted wind patterns, crowd response, even the behavior of birds overhead. The court was a cosmic theater, and everything within it mattered. One account from a city-state near modern-day Belize records a match played during a rare Venus-Mars alignment. The teams were chosen not by merit, but by prophecy. The ball was painted with symbols of duality, night and day, fire and water. The outcome of the game was believed to influence a coming war. The scribe who recorded it used the phrase, "They played, and the gods tilted their heads to watch." The atmosphere during a match was thick, not just with heat, but with meaning. Every bounce was a heartbeat. The players moved with fluid precision, twisting, dropping, leaping. The ball struck stone with sharp, echoing thuds. Dust rose in thin clouds. Occasionally, someone stumbled. A cry rang out. But the game never paused. The rhythm continued. Sometimes a player would make an offering mid-game. A cut on the hand. A bit of blood on the ball. Not to delay, but to signal devotion. to mark a turning point. These gestures were not spontaneous, they were ancestral. Reenactments of the myth where one brother sacrifices part of himself so the other may win. The scribes captured these moments with delicate care. They wrote in short lines, repeating motifs, the glyph for struggle, for breath, for heat, for the axis of the world. Some records suggest scribes entered altered states while writing, rhythmically chanting the players' names as they worked, aligning their breath with the bounce of the ball. On rare occasions, a player would score by sending the ball cleanly through the stone ring. This was not just a triumph, it was a cosmic breakthrough. The game often stopped then and there, not from exhaustion, but from fulfillment. The act had closed the loop, completed the ritual. The player would be carried from the court on shoulders, not as a champion, but as one who had touched the divine. And what came after depended on the context. In some cities, the winning team was celebrated, fed richly, adorned with feathers and jade. In others, especially during festivals tied to the underworld calendar, the winner might be sacrificed. Not as punishment, but as reward, as a return to the gods who had granted victory. The scribes did not question these outcomes. They recorded them. There is a carved panel from Yaxchilling depicting a victorious ballplayer kneeling, calmly as a priest approaches with a flint knife. Behind them, a god hovers in the sky, reaching down. The scribe's notation beside it reads, "He opened the gate with his body, and the rains were pleased." Even in more mundane matches, played for entertainment or training, the ball court remained sacred. Young nobles trained there not only to learn agility or strength, but to understand myth, to feel its rhythm in their bones. The court taught not just sport, but time, responsibility, cosmic duty. At night, the court emptied. Moonlight fell across the stone, casting long shadows. The faint scent of sweat and smoke lingered in the still air. A scribe might return then alone to finish the day's record. He would sit cross-legged by the platform, brush in hand, listening to the hush. And perhaps he'd hear the echo of the ball just once bouncing again in memory. That solitary sound, imagined or real, held weight, not as a ghost or omen, but as a rhythm once known, a rhythm still alive beneath the vines, beneath the cracked stone. For the Maya, the ball court was never truly empty. It lived beyond the matches, beyond the players, beyond even the cities themselves. The scribes knew this. When they returned at night to add finishing glyphs or reflect on an especially charged match, they often wrote not of scores or names, but of atmosphere. The ball was heavy with heat. The west wall caught the voice of the moon. The gods leaned low, but did not speak. These were not embellishments. They were attempts to capture something unspoken, the energy that filled the court during play. Many scribes were former players themselves. Not champions, necessarily, but young nobles who once learned on the same courts, moved to the rhythm of bounce and breath. They understood the movement, the weight of the ball, the strain on the hip. The writing reflected that knowledge, not as mere record, but as memory turned to ink. Some scribes even created personal codices just for ball games. Folded books filled with shorthand symbols like musical notation. Dots for movement, spirals for spin, jagged lines for sudden impact. These documents were not official records, but training tools, guides to teach future scribes how to watch with accuracy and write with rhythm. The ball court was also a place of diplomacy. Rival city-states would sometimes settle disputes by sending players instead of soldiers. The match in these cases became a proxy war. The crowd grew quiet. Banners of each city waved stiffly in the breeze. Each bounce carried tension. A fumble might signal more than clumsiness. It might reflect divine disfavor. The outcome might lead to tribute payments, political marriages, or in rare cases, renewed conflict. These matches were particularly well documented. Scribes were positioned at every corner of the court, some perched on low stone ledges to get better sight lines. Their codices would be copied and distributed among priesthoods, libraries, even to foreign courts. In such moments, the scribes became not just recorders, but witnesses to turning points in history. One fragment, preserved in the temple archives of Kalakmul, describes a match between two rival houses. The teams were evenly matched, but near dusk, the ball struck the chest of a player and flew against all odds through the high stone ring. The crowd fell silent. The scribe wrote, "The sun stopped to see." That line appears again, nearly a generation later, in another codex, copied in reverence. These repetitions were not lazy borrowing. They were intentional echoes. The Maya believed that events, when written with care, created patterns. And patterns, when repeated, shaped reality. To echo a line was to summon the energy of the past, to give the present weight. Sometimes the ball game was played during festivals. The court would be draped in fresh garlands. Musicians played from shaded alcoves. Children lined the edges, mimicking the players' movements. The smell of roasted maize and cacao drifted through the air. These matches were more celebratory, but still sacred. The court, after all, remained unchanged. Its stone still remembered every offering, every spill of sweat, every drop of blood. At the game's end, players saluted the cardinal directions. First east, where the sun is born, then north, west, and south. This turning was not for spectacle. It was a cosmic acknowledgement, a way of thanking the world for balance. The scribes wrote it down each time, even if the gesture seemed routine. In repetition, after all, was reverence. The scribes also noted absences. If a player failed to arrive or a priest delayed the start, it was recorded. If an eagle circled too low or a sudden wind swept across the court, it was recorded, not as trivia, but as potential message. Everything in the ball court had meaning, especially silence, especially interruption. In the later days of Maya cities, as population centers shifted and courtly influence waned, the ball games continued, sometimes with smaller audiences, sometimes with fewer players. But the court remained, the ball still bounced, and the scribes still wrote. Even as the jungle thickened and vines crept up the slope walls, someone, perhaps the last in the long line, would take brush to paper and write. They played today. The ring was still. But the rhythm held. Archaeologists today still uncover fragments of ball courts, some vast, others modest. Carvings show players mid-strike, their hips twisted, their arms raised, their faces intent. The courts are aligned with the stars, with sunrise on solstice days, with cardinal points. These were not just arenas. They were cosmic instruments. To stand in one now, quiet and alone, is to feel the weight of layered time. The echo doesn't need a ball to trigger it. The memory is built into the stone, the steps, the slope, the sun's arc across the line of sight. It all remains, and somewhere beneath the surface, beneath moss and soil, there are still pieces of the game balls buried in ritual. Offerings placed at center court, scribes' inkstones forgotten in haste. They wait quietly, like everything else, for alignment, for rediscovery. The Maya believed that games told stories. That movement was a kind of writing. That fate was something one could bounce between hands or hips and shape into meaning. And though the players are gone, the court is quiet, and the glyphs are faded, the story still plays. Slowly, invisibly, still moving, still echoing, still watched by the gods. Chapter 10. The glyph that disappeared among the thousands of glyphs carved across stele, painted into codices and etched into temple walls. There is one that stands alone, not for its meaning, but for its mystery. It appears only once, in a single city, on a single monument, and after that, never again. The glyph itself is elegant, curved yet angular, balanced but strange. Its lines do not match any known symbol for gods, rulers, animals, or actions. No direct translation exists. It was found carved deep into a lintel stone at Tikal, just above the entrance to a modest structure behind the main plaza. The glyph rests between two more familiar signs, one for divine speech and one for royal authority. It should tell a story. It doesn't. Scribes and epigraphers have debated its nature for decades. Was it a name? A forgotten god? A lost verb from a dialect that never spread? Or was it something deeper, an idea too powerful, too unstable to be repeated? The structure in which the glyph was found has no other inscriptions, no murals, no stele nearby. Just this single glyph, cut with careful hands, polished smooth, framed in shadows. To understand its mystery, one must understand how Mayan writing worked. Glyphs were more than words. Each was a condensed symbol of layered meaning, sometimes representing a sound, a word, a name, or even a calendar function. Often, one glyph could do several things at once. They were built like architecture, blocks within blocks, meaning within meaning. And scribes were trained not only to write them, but to feel their shape in ritual space. Glyphs were never improvised. Every new symbol had to be introduced formally. It needed lineage, precedent, repetition. But this glyph, the one carved above that doorway, has none. It came from nowhere, appeared once, and then vanished. The first scholar to see it was an archaeologist in the 1930s. She noted its elegance, its unfamiliarity, and penciled it into her field book with the label, unclassified. Possibly unique. Later studies compared it to known glyphs for fire, silence, sky, jaguar. Nothing matched. One researcher thought it resembled a coiled serpent folding inward. Another said it looked like a pair of eyes closed in prayer. But no consensus emerged. What complicates the mystery further is the context in which it was found. The structure it adorns was built during a time of political tension. The reigning king, known from other stele as Jisa Chan Keawil, had begun making bold claims. He was said to speak directly to the gods, not through priests, not through omens or dreams, but through his own breath. Glyphs from the main plaza describe him as the throat of creation, he who listens without smoke. This kind of language was rare. Most rulers spoke through ritual bloodletting, star readings, offerings. To claim divine speech directly was a disruption, a fracture in the sacred order. It bypassed the scribes, the priests, even the gods' usual intermediaries. It recentered power in a single voice, and a lone glyph, carved above that darkened threshold, appeared during this period. Some now believe it may have been a forbidden word, a name for something only spoken once. An attempt to create a glyph so charged, so singular, it needed no repetition. It is also possible the glyph was meant to vanish. There is precedent in Maya culture for temporary writing glyphs made for a single ceremony to be erased after. Ritual codices were sometimes burned after use. Their ashes offered in cenotes. Speech could be sacred, but only briefly. Perhaps this glyph was a spoken thing, crystallized for one moment, then buried in silence. It survives. Stone, after all, is hard to silence. And so it sits there still weathered by rain, brushed by leaves, seen by bats, photographed by scholars, puzzled over by students. A single mark in a city of thousands. The scribes of the time left no explanation, no footnote, no replication, and that silence, so rare in a culture of careful record, feels louder than a scream. It is not the only glyph to vanish. but it is the only one that vanishes so completely. Other symbols have changed over time. Some grew more elaborate. Some were shortened or merged with others. Language evolved, but evolution leaves a trail. This glyph has none, no earlier form, no later echo. It's as though it fell from the sky, landed on a single page, and never turned up again. To some, that is troubling. To others, it is sacred. There is a story, passed down among local elders, perhaps newer than it seems, that says a scribe once created a glyph so true, so potent, that the gods refused to see it twice. They allowed it to be written once and then turned their faces. The scribe vanished. The temple closed. The word remained. Whether myth or memory, the idea persists that writing can be too powerful. That language, when wielded outside tradition, can open doors best left sealed. That, perhaps, is why the structure bearing the glyph was eventually walled up. Not destroyed, not collapsed, just closed. Stone laid across its doorway, mortar pressed into its seams as if to contain something. No records explain this act. It was not during invasion. There are no signs of fire, no damage, only silence. And it is that silence the scribes did not fill. In most Maya cities, when a ruler died or a temple was sealed, scribes documented the transition. They carved farewell glyphs, ceremonial dedications, even instructions for future generations. But here, at this doorway in Tikal, there is nothing. No explanation, no closure. Only the glyph, carved in precision above the entrance, and then emptiness. Later rulers made no mention of it. Later scribes did not revive the symbol. And even the elaborate calendrical systems of the Maya, their great spirals of days and epochs, make no special note of this moment, which in its own way is extraordinary, because to the Maya, time itself was sacred record. They believed the past rippled forward, that dates echoed, that nothing happened without consequence, and every act left a footprint in time. And yet this glyph, this structure, this moment seems to have left no echo at all, as if it were written outside time. The structure was rediscovered centuries later beneath a layer of jungle, moss, and stone dust. The wall sealing it had eroded just enough to show the lintel. When the archaeologists brushed away the debris, they found the glyph staring back clean lines, sharp corners, and a sense of deep, deliberate intention. They did not enter immediately. Instead, they studied the doorway, mapped the surrounding stones, measured the light patterns across its face. The structure was modest in size, no more than a small shrine or chamber. Its proportions were slightly unusual. The angle of the walls subtly offset, the ceiling unusually low. It felt compressed, as if space had been tightened around the symbol itself. When the team finally entered, they found little inside. A single stone slab, bare, no offerings, no bones, no murals. The walls were smooth and decorated. The floor bore faint scraping marks, perhaps from furniture long gone. The air was still, and there, carved into the back wall, another glyph. Or rather, a variation, fainter, less complete. It shared the same core structure as the glyph above the doorway, but some strokes were missing, others reversed. As if it had been started but not finished, or as if it were trying to rewrite itself. No other glyphs were found in the chamber. No guides, no context. Just the echo of the unknown. This second glyph deepened the mystery. Was it a correction? A counterpoint? A failed imitation? Scholars offered theories. Perhaps a student scribe tried to replicate the master glyph and abandoned the attempt. Perhaps it was meant to mirror the first in inner reflection. Or perhaps the chamber was not a shrine, but a trap for language itself, a space to hold an idea too large to roam free. No one knows. The structure is now studied sparingly. Some believe more should be excavated. Others say it should be left alone. There are whispers among researchers, not of curses or hauntings, but of unease, of the way the room seems to press inward, how the glyph feels more like a presence than a symbol. A few have tried to reconstruct the glyph's meaning by analogy. They've broken it to its visual components and compared each part to known symbols. The curl of a serpent, the arc of a moon, the stroke used for breath or voice. Still, nothing holds. The pieces don't align. The structure resists decoding. Perhaps it is not a word, but a gesture. A frozen invocation caught between intention and form. The Maya understood language in ways we are only beginning to grasp. For them, a glyph was not just representation, it was embodiment. Writing was action. Carving a name summoned it. Painting a god symbol called presence. A word once made visible could not be unspoken. So what happens when a word is made that has no lineage? No past? The answer, it seems, is disappearance. One scholar, writing in a faded field journal, offered this thought. It is not the glyph that vanished. It is the world required to read it. That phrase lingers because in the Maya view of history, not all knowledge is lost. Some sleeps, some waits. Some is carried silently in roots and stone, waiting for alignment. Perhaps the glyph, unreadable now, made perfect sense once. Or perhaps it was always meant to remain unread, an eternal pause in a sentence too long to finish. There are moments in modern life that still echo this silence. An artifact with no context. A phrase that defies translation. A monument built for a purpose we can no longer explain. And behind each mystery, perhaps, stands a scribe quiet, brush poised, capturing something fleeting. Perhaps that is the gift of the glyph that disappeared. Not confusion, but humility. A reminder that even in a culture where writing was sacred, where language was a ladder to the stars, there were still places where words stopped, where meaning slipped behind the veil, where silence was the final act, and even then, someone carved it. A single mark, precise, intentional, alone, waiting. Chapter 11, The Curse of Palenque. Tucked within the hills of Chiapas, where mist clings to limestone ridges and howler monkeys echo through the canopy, lies the ancient city of Palenque. Its temples emerge from the forest like thoughts rising through sleep refined, deliberate, dreamlike. Of all the Maya cities, Palenque feels the most intimate. Its buildings do not sprawl. They gather close, linked by stone corridors and whispers of water from hidden aqueducts. But beneath its beauty, legends linger. Stories speak of a curse, not thunderous or theatrical, but quiet, patient, exacting, a kind of curse that waits. The heart of the tale lies beneath the temple of the inscriptions, a stepped pyramid crowned by a chamber filled with glyphs. These inscriptions are among the most complete in the Maya world. Over 600 glyphs recording the lineage, dreams, and burial of the city's greatest ruler, Kainich, Janab Pakal. They speak of gods and bloodlines, visions and rebirth, and beneath them lies Pakal himself, entombed in stone and jade. But this chapter is not about him. It is about the scribe, a lesser-known inscription tucked into the inner wall of a smaller temple to the east, tells a different story. It is fragmentary, damaged, faint, yet the words remain. He who turned the glyph in mockery, he who dreamed a future not written, he who now sleeps beneath the step. Scholars have puzzled over these lines for decades. They do not match the usual tone of Maya inscriptions. There's no praise, no ritual date, no divine invocation. Just a warning and a location beneath the step. In 1994, during restoration of the temple staircases, archaeologists uncovered a hidden compartment beneath one of the risers. Inside, they found a bundle, fabric now decayed, wrapped around in inkstone, a bone brush, and a single folded codex, sealed shut with resin. The codex was unlike any other. Its glyphs were uneven. Some mirrored existing signs, but others were new variations, distortions, reimaginings. It read like a dream half remembered. References to future days, unknown gods, and a phrase repeated at the bottom of every page. The shape of time is not fixed. This alone would be striking. But then came the figure buried nearby. Beneath the bundle, archaeologists discovered a skeleton. The bones were curled, as if in sleep. One hand was tucked beneath the ribs, the other outstretched toward the staircase above. No offering surrounded the body. No jade, no shell, no ceremonial tools, just dust, fragments of cotton, and a codex. Carbon dating placed the burial in the final decades of Palenque's peak shortly after the death of Pakal, and just before the city began to wane. There was no other record of the man's name, no carving, no monument, only the context and the codex. And the warnings? Subsequent analysis suggested the scribe had once served in the court, likely trained, possibly trusted, but eventually silenced. The nature of his offense, if offense it was, seems to center on the glyphs he invented. Not merely poor copies or artistic experiments, but intentional deviations, words not sanctioned, ideas not aligned with the calendar or the gods. One phrase in his codex appears repeatedly. I see the wheel turn backward. Such language would have been dangerous. The Maya held time as sacred structure. Glyphs preserve that structure. To write against it, to twist time into loops or mirrors, was to defy the divine. Not through violence, but through ink. And so the story goes, the scribe wrote too freely. Perhaps in secret. Perhaps convinced of a vision. He carved a prophecy that diverged from tradition. He named days that did not exist. He described a world where kings no longer rose with omens, but fell with silence, where temples stood empty, covered in vines, where no scribes remained to write. The court responded not with spectacle, but with precision. The codex was sealed, the scribe buried, the glyphs erased except for one hidden in the back chamber, left as both warning and remembrance. Not to honor, not to condemn, just to record. And over time, the city began to change. Not all at once. The temples still stood. The aqueducts still flowed. Festivals were still held. But something subtle shifted. Fewer stelae were raised. Fewer names carved. The scribes wrote less. Some lines ended mid-glyph. Some codices grew thinner. There were gaps. Whether this was coincidence or consequence remains debated. But the timing is precise, and the silence that followed feels deliberate. Later generations of scribes, when copying genealogies or ceremonial texts, would sometimes skip Palenque altogether, as though afraid to speak of it, as though the act of remembering might awaken what had been buried. Yet the city endured, if only in stone. The temple of the inscriptions remains, its staircases steep, its glyphs intact. Visitors climb the steps slowly, reading aloud the names of kings long dead. Most never hear of the smaller temple. Fewer still know the story of the buried scribe. But those who linger, who walk beneath the trees at dusk, sometimes speak of a feeling of being watched, not unkindly but closely, as though someone is still keeping track. Perhaps it is the wind, curling through hollow chambers and vine-covered windows, imitating breath. Or perhaps it is something quieter, a residue left behind by the scribes who walked these halls. Those who once believed that language could contain fate. Their brushes, now dust, once moved with purpose, shaping time itself into form. In the years following the discovery of the buried scribe, the codex was unsealed. With careful tools and steady hands, researchers separated its pages. Many had fused from age and moisture, but others, remarkably, were still legible. The glyphs inside were strange, fluid, resisting strict translation. There were no clear dates, no named kings. Instead, the pages followed a pattern, a spiral of linked ideas, wrapped in metaphor. One page shows a tree growing backward, its roots flowering into the sky. Another shows a staircase that leads not up, but inward, a jaguar with 3 faces. A moon that never sets. The final page is blank, except for one glyph, a symbol loosely resembling the known glyph for mirror, but doubled back on itself, as if collapsing inward. The scribes of Palenque never acknowledged this work, but they did not erase it either. That choice, the decision not to destroy, has puzzled many. Why bury it, seal it, but preserve it? Why mark it with a warning, but leave the glyph visible? Perhaps the court feared the power of the ideas, but could not bring themselves to silence them completely. Perhaps they understood that some truths are dangerous, but still worth keeping, even if buried. The building that housed the scribes' final resting place is now known unofficially as the Temple of the Hidden Word. It receives few visitors. The doorway remains partially closed, both out of structural need and cultural respect. A small plaque near the entrance, the unusual glyph work inside, but avoids the word curse. The term, after all, carries modern weight. The Maya had no direct equivalent. They understood consequence, not damnation. A wrong word could unbalance the world, but so could an incorrect sacrifice. A missed festival or a misaligned step during ritual. Order mattered. Harmony mattered. And to disrupt it was not evil, it was simply dangerous. The scribes were guardians of that harmony. Most of them worked in discipline, repeating forms learned from generations before. They copied lineages, tracked eclipses, scheduled feasts, but occasionally one might dream differently, might see beyond the sanctioned path, might write what others refuse to imagine. The buried scribe of Palenque may have been one such dreamer. His codex does not appear to seek chaos. There is no threat in its pages, only curiosity, possibility, the idea that time might not be fixed, that gods might not speak only through kings, that scribes, too, might glimpse divinity, not in temples, but in ink. These were not accepted thoughts. But they were written, and in writing, they endured. Centuries later, when modern readers look upon his pages, they cannot help but feel unease. Not from horror, but from proximity. The symbols feel familiar, even when they cannot be read. Like a language half remembered from a dream. A voice speaking softly through the folds of time, not to alarm, but to remind there were always other paths. And perhaps the scribes knew every now and then one must be taken. The fall of Palenque did not come as fire or war. It fated its rulers unnamed, its festivals unattended, its glyphs unfinished. The temples still stood, but the voices dimmed. Inscriptions grew shorter. Codices stopped midline. Whether this was the result of politics, environment, or the slow erosion of belief, we cannot say, but something ended. And perhaps it began with a word, a glyph carved where none belonged, a vision written too soon. The Temple of the Inscriptions remains a marvel, its tomb, its architecture, its records unmatched. But the smaller temple, the one few see, holds a different kind of legacy. Not grandeur, but caution. Not monument, but mirror. Visitors who stand near its threshold speak of a strange quiet. The jungle is alive around them, birds, insects, wind, but at that doorway the air stills. Time feels thick. Some claim to hear scratching. Most hear nothing, but all leave slowly. Because something was written there, and though its meaning remains uncertain, its presence is undeniable. That is the power the scribes understood. Not just to remember, but to create memory. To write something into being so thoroughly that it cannot be undone, even when sealed, even when forgotten. And so, beneath the stairs, beside the inkstone, within the silence, the scribe waits. Not for release, not for recognition. Just for the next turn of time, when the glyph might rise again. Not as a curse, but as a question. Chapter 12, Sacred Music. Sacred pain before the first light touched the stone temples of the Maya. Before the fires were lit or the drums awakened, there was music. Not background, not ornament. Music was structure. Music was offering. Music was breath made sacred. Within the sacred precincts of great cities, Tikal, Palenque, Copen, Bonampak, there were chambers built not for sight, but for sound. Their walls were curved to catch vibration, their ceilings shaped like the bellies of gongs. When a conch shell sounded from within, the note would carry down corridors through courtyards, echoing like a god's sigh. In these spaces, music was created not only to please the gods, but to summon them. Scribes, often thought of as silent observers, played an essential role in preserving the sonic world. They wrote not only words, but music. In painted codices, one finds glyphs representing instruments, turtles struck with bone, flutes carved from vulture wing, drums stretched with jaguar hide. Some glyphs mimic sound itself, the vibration of voice, the trembling of reed, the crash of storm remembered in rhythm. But these sounds were not gentle. They carried purpose, sometimes pain. To make music sacred was to fuse it with body. Ritual songs were not sung casually. They were chanted through breath made sharp by fasting. Dancers performed to bone flutes with steps preordained by calendar. Instruments were not merely played, they were offered. One of the most haunting instruments was the death whistle. Carved from ceramic and shaped like skulls or animals, these whistles produced screams, high, sharp, broken sounds, meant to pierce the veil between worlds. They were used at funerals, eclipses, and during trance dances. Not every scribe could record their use. Some would shake afterward. One glyph fragment describes a night ceremony where the whistles were blown in a ring, and the stars trembled at the sound. Yet not all sacred music was violent. There were lullabies sung to newborns beneath the ceiba tree. Slow, spiraling chants hummed at the solstice. Love songs whispered in feathered courtyards. And in the temple before sunrise, a single flute might hold a note long enough to still breath. The scribes captured these, not in notes as we know them, but in rhythm glyphs, sound pairings, verbal equations of tone and moment. Some instruments were believed to carry spirit. A drum made from the skin of a jaguar killed during a vision hunt was considered alive. Its sound called the god of strength. A flute once played during a royal birth was kept wrapped in cloth and used only for heirs. Instruments were passed down like sacred names, and their use recorded with care. One codex lists 5 generations of drummers from the same family, each birth accompanied by the same rhythm. Music also marked pain. During sacrifice, there was always sound. Drums pulsed beneath the chanting. Flutes wept their notes over stone. The purpose was not to mask pain, but to hold it, frame it, make it meaningful. A body offered in silence risked being lost. A body offered in music became eternal. Scribes sat nearby, brush poised, marking the time between beats, the shifts in pitch. Some painted scenes of ceremonies where the blood flowed in harmony with drum. One panel from Bonampak shows a scribe kneeling beside a musician. The scribe is not watching the ritual blade. He is watching the fingers on the drum. Music was prophecy, too. Trained ears knew what a change in chant might mean. A skipped note, a broken rhythm, these were not mistakes. They were signs. The gods listened through vibration, not just word. And scribes documented the patterns. When rain followed a 4-beat pulse. When war followed a flute played too low. When a royal child was born during a double echo. One day each year, during the shadowless noon when the sun stood directly overhead, cities fell silent. All sound ceased. No drums, no chant, no voice. And then, as shadow returned, a single note was played, often a conch or a clay whistle. That note marked the return of motion, of time. It was called the breath of the gods. Scribes recorded it as a spiral, looping in on itself, a moment of perfect stillness pierced by one sacred sound. Certain instruments required offerings before use. Flutes, carved from human bone, were kept in darkness between ceremonies. To play them without first lighting incense was to risk misfortune. Not because the bone was feared, but because it still remembered. Scribes often inscribed the name of the flute's former owner beside the ceremony in which it was played. This was not morbid, it was respectful. The dead, after all, had a voice. And in the Maya world, music was voice-given form. The scribes, for their part, sometimes joined in performance, not as musicians, but as harmonizers chanting the counts, calling the beats, whispering the names of gods between drum strokes. In this way, writing and sound merged. The ink became voice. The brush, breath. One rare codex contains a full musical liturgy for a rain ceremony. Its glyphs describe not just what to play, but how. The drum is to be struck with hands cooled by cenote water. The flute must rise with the dawn breeze. The singers to begin from silence, build to sorrow, and return. Each line a melody in ink. The scribe who composed that codex is not named, but the rhythm of their writing is unmistakable. Each glyph spaced with deliberation, each mark echoing a beat. Even the brush strokes seem to curve in harmony, as though the act of writing itself was a form of music. This was the heart of Mayan sacred sound, unity. Not simply melody or tone, but the unification of time, body, breath, and will. Nothing happened in isolation. Every note was tied to a cycle, every chant aligned with a star, and every recording by brush or carving ensured that those vibrations would endure. Of all the Maya musical traditions, one of the most enigmatic involved the hidden harmonics, sounds not heard, but felt. In certain chambers, deep within temple interiors, stones were shaped to resonate. A drum struck outside would hum within. A conch blown in the plaza would vibrate a glyph-lined hallway. Some scholars believe scribes understood this resonance and recorded it in subtle ways. Repeated symbols appear in corridors where echoes linger. Glyphs of breath and rhythm cluster near curved walls. These were not accidents. They were composition space turned into song. But sacred music was also exhausting. Performers often fasted for days beforehand, their bodies hollowed, tuned. A single ritual might last through nightfall into morning. The chant unbroken, the rhythm relentless. Musicians bled from their palms. Singers collapsed mid-note. And scribes stayed alert, capturing each change, each deviation, each signal from the gods. The pain was part of the offering. Instruments carried this pain as well. The best turtle shell drums came from animals taken during eclipse. The most powerful whistles used clay mixed with ash from old royal fires. One flute, found in a burial at Calakmul, had faint red staining near its mouthpiece. Chemical analysis revealed traces of chili and blood components used in rites meant to thin the veil between worlds. That flute was buried with a child. The scribe who noted its use wrote only, "She called the rain and returned with it." Not all sacred music ended in suffering, but most passed through it. The Maya believed the spirit moved clearest in pain, as in joy. And sound was how they captured that movement, through voice, through breath, through instruments tuned to echo across centuries. A handful of modern musicians, working with replica instruments and guidance from Maya descendants, have attempted to recreate these ceremonies. They gather in temples at dawn. They strike drums, carved like those found at Copen. They blow flutes shaped like jaguar bones. And though their notes are sincere, there is always the sense of distance. Because the music was not just technical, it was lived. A sound meant to call the gods cannot be replayed without the same hunger, the same vision, the same sacrifice. The scribes knew this. They recorded not just what was played, but how it was played under what sky, by whose hand, with what intention. They understood that sound, like word, was sacred only when full of meaning. Some scribes specialized in sonic record. They did not write genealogies or track battles. They followed the drum. One such figure, known only through a name glyph meaning "he who echoes," appears in murals walking beside musicians, his scrolls open, his head bowed. He's not watching the ceremony. He is listening to it. His glyph appears in 4 cities, always near depictions of ceremony. No dates accompany his name. No lineage, just the title. And beside it, a mark that some believe represents breath made visible, a curved line like smoke rising from the mouth. That may have been his task, not to write what was seen, but what was felt. In this way, scribes were also composers. They arranged silence and sound. They captured the invisible. They preserved echoes. A passage from a temple in Yaxchilan reads, "He wrote the rain as it struck the stone." Not a metaphor, a description, the rhythm of droplets, the timing of thunder. These were written down, line by line, to be read again at drought's end. It is easy now to scribes as mere historians, recorders of kings and wars, but their work moved deeper, into rhythm, into pulse, into the spaces where voice met God. They kept time not only with calendars, but with hearts. And when a scribe's time came to end, their tools were buried carefully. Brushes bound with cotton, ink bowls sealed with resin. One burial in Uzmal contained not bones, but instruments: flute, drumstick, rattle, and a folded codex with only 3 lines. Breath before word, pain before praise, silence after all. It is a fitting epitaph. Today, many of the instruments remain silent, their sounds unknown, their uses guessed, but their memory remains in glyph and mural, in corridors that hum without wind, in doorways shaped to channel a single note. And when you walk beneath the stone vaults of the Maya, you can still hear something, not music exactly, but its ghost. A low thrum, a breath caught between time and stone, a rhythm waiting to be remembered.
Chapter 13. The night of the twin eclipses in the Mayan world. Time was not linear. It curved, looped, returned. The sky was not a backdrop, but a living scroll, and the stars did not shine. They spoke, The scribes, perched beneath those skies, with brush and bark paper, listened, and then came the year of the twin eclipse. Twice in a single cycle, the moon slipped across the sun, once in the early spring, once as autumn approached. Both times, the sky dimmed, the air thickened, and across the land, people fell silent. This was no ordinary omen. It was a convergence, rare enough to rewrite the meaning of the year itself. The first eclipse arrived at dawn. Birdsong halted. Shadows stretched strange and long, and when the light failed, even the trees seemed to hold their breath. In cities across the Maya lowlands, Calakmul, Copan, Tikal, the same ritual began. Priests stepped forward, knives gleaming, blood already painted across their foreheads. But before the cuts were made, a new sound was heard. Brushes against bark. The scribes were already writing. Not after, not in reflection, but during. They understood that to miss a moment like this was to sever the thread of history. One scribe, working near lake, wrote in a narrow, fast hand, "The breath of the gods curls dark at sunrise. Light returns with a cost. Do not forget." Another, in Palenque, sketched the sun as a great serpent swallowing itself, jaws meeting tail in a perfect eclipse glyph. He painted it in ochre, letting the pigment crack as it dried, an unintentional texture that later scribes preserved, believing the cracks held meaning. But it was the second eclipse that brought unease. It came in silence, near midnight. The moon, full and golden, began to fade. Fires were lit in temple courtyards. Conch shells were blown, but no chant began. The usual ceremonies halted. This time, the gods were not waiting for offerings. They were speaking directly. The stars behind the darkened moon seemed to shimmer more brightly, aligning in ways not charted on previous calendars. The scribes, sleep-deprived and trembling, kept working. Two young scribes were tasked with recording both eclipses in a single codex. They wrote by torchlight, the shadows of their hands dancing across the page. One line reads, "This is the time between breaths. We write with eyes closed, with hearts open." The ink they used was rare, mixed with soot, honey, and the juice of crushed berries, gathered only during solstice. The pages were folded long and narrow, meant to be read like a slow unfolding of night. The codex survives today, kept under glass in a climate-controlled vault. The torch burn at its edges still visible. Twin eclipses were not just rare, they were sacred disruptions. To the Maya, the sun and moon were not objects, but beings. The sun, a journeying hero, the moon, a shifting spirit of time and tide. When they crossed paths in the sky, especially more than once in a calendar cycle, it meant something beyond mortal understanding. And that was the scribe's burden, to understand what could not be known, to explain what could not be said. Some believed the dual eclipses marked the death of an age. Others saw it as rebirth. One glyph, painted on a temple wall in shows two figures, one cloaked in sun, the other in moon, locked in embrace, each holding a serpent by the tail. Beneath them, a smaller figure kneels, brush in hand, gazing upward. That was the scribe, not passive, not neutral, but a bridge between sky and story. The days following the second eclipse were filled with signs. Crops flowered out of season. A white deer was spotted on the steps of a temple in Yaxchilan. A comet trailed across the horizon, faint but steady. The scribes wrote each occurrence carefully, not in isolation but as part of the pattern. They knew that the gods spoke not in single moments, but in threads. They stitched those threads into glyphs. Long lines of ink, curved and intersecting. Symbols of night and water. Marks denoting change, transition, passage, and between them, repeated references to the second shadow, a term never seen before. and never seen again. One theory suggests the scribes saw the twin eclipses as a test, that the gods were watching not just what was done, but what was written, that the act of recording would decide what survived. In this view, the scribes became participants in cosmic balance, not just observers, but guardians. And so they did not sleep. 4 nights before and after the eclipses, the scribes kept vigil, their eyes red, their fingers ink-stained. They tracked the stars and the wind, the movements of animals, the reactions of priests. Every breath of the city was captured, its rhythm, its tremor, its stillness. One final passage from the Eclipse Codex stands out, written in a different hand, smaller, perhaps added later. It says, "We watched the sky divide itself, and we did not look away. May these words be our offering."
The line rests alone at the bottom of the page, flanked by 2 eclipse glyphs. It is not decorated. There is no flourish, just quiet resolve. For the scribes who lived through those nights, the act of recording was not only memory, it was devotion. To write the truth of the sky was to acknowledge one's place beneath it. After the twin eclipses, a subtle transformation moved through the cities. Temples that had once been adorned with sun discs began featuring twin circles, one light, one dark. Water channels were rerouted in certain ceremonial plazas, forming spirals instead of lines. In one city, a festival date was shifted permanently to align with the eclipse moon, even though the alignment would never return in their lifetimes. The scribes chronicled these changes without comment, but their tone shifted. Where earlier inscriptions had focused on the linear progression of royal deeds and divine favor, now there appeared more philosophical reflections. Glyphs representing breath, balance, division, and reunion emerged more frequently. One codex from Uzmal features repeated use of the glyph for veil, as if to suggest that the world had been somehow, and that the scribes were now writing with a deeper awareness. They wrote more about dreams. Dreams were always part of Maya spiritual life, but after the twin eclipses, scribes began documenting them with the same seriousness they gave to celestial charts. One fragment records a dream in which a scribe followed 2 moons through a forest, only to find them merge into a mirror, showing his own face. Another recounts a night where the stars refused to stay in place, slipping out of the sky and scattering across the earth. These were not idle fantasies. They were believed to be messages, and the scribes did not ignore messages. They began carving eclipse glyphs on personal items, brush holders, ink bowls, even the straps of bark paper codices. Some scholars believe this personalization reflects not only reverence, but fear. The eclipses had touched them, had moved through them, and in that touch, something had shifted. Yet, not all cities responded the same way. In some places, the twin eclipses were treated as anomalies, quickly forgotten or quietly absorbed into ritual. But in the smaller centers, places without grand temples, where the scribes were close to the people, the memory endured longer. Glyphs painted on household walls include eclipse symbols, often beside family names or food records. It was as if everyone wanted a piece of that moment, not to own it, but to belong to it. A stela discovered in a forgotten plaza shows a young girl holding a tablet up to the sky. Around her, glyphs describe the 2 nights when the stars hid. And beside her is a scribe, kneeling, painting what she sees. The inscription reads, "She saw the gods close their eyes. He kept them open." The gods, the Maya believed, did not punish with malice. They tested with precision. The scribes, in return, answered with clarity. No detail was too small. They recorded the taste of the air during eclipse, metallic like the skin of a river snake. They noted the silence of the birds, the sudden coolness on their skin, the way the torches seemed dimmer. All of it mattered. All of it formed the pattern. Because to the scribes, the pattern was everything. The sky was not separate from them. The stars moved in relation to their breath. The sun's shadow danced with their pulse. Writing about the eclipses was not just for future record, was to anchor themselves in the moment, to keep the world from drifting. They had no telescopes, but they had memory. They had no maps of the galaxy, but they had rhythm. And in those two eclipses, they glimpsed something vast, not terrifying, but sobering. A reminder that the gods moved according to cycles even the kings could not command. A reminder that light returns, but not always in the same shape. One final mural, painted years after the twin eclipses, shows a circle divided by a line, half black, half gold. Beneath it, a seated scribe holds a brush in one hand and a flower in the other. The caption reads, "He wrote in darkness. He sang into light." And so they did. The twin eclipses passed. The stars resumed their paths. The gods remained silent. But the scribes remembered. They etched the silence into stone. They folded the light into ink. They watched the sky divide and did not look away. Chapter 14. When the jungle took it back, there is a moment in the deepest parts of the rainforest when the air stills. The canopy sways far above, thick with howler calls and unseen wings, but below, where moss grips stone and orchids climb like ghosts, there's only hush. You might pass a root-covered mound and not know that it was once a city. A plaza, a throne. This is what happened to Tikal, to Kalakmal, to Yaxchilan and Usmal. The jungle did not destroy them. It reclaimed them. The final chapter of many Maya cities was not written in fire or invasion, but in silence. One by one, the great centers dimmed. Temples stood, but no priests climbed them. Palaces loomed, but their halls echoed with no footfall. And beneath those empty colonnades, scribes laid down their brushes. At first, the signs were subtle, fewer inscriptions, shorter codices. Some carvings left unfinished, as if the hand that held the chisel had simply never returned. One lintel at Peter's Meggers ends midcliff. Another at Caracal shows a ritual procession, but the final figure is only outlined, never painted in. The scribes, ever faithful to their duty, tried to mark even the decline. One codex, water-damaged and almost illegible, includes a line near its end. We record the fading, so the gods will not forget. The ink is pale. The glyphs slightly warped, possibly written on damp bark, but the sentiment is clear. Even in their waning, they wrote, even as the vines crept in. The collapse was not uniform. Some cities fell quickly abandoned over a generation. Others lingered for decades. A few, like Lamanai, were inhabited into the Spanish era. But for the grand centers of the classic period, the 9th century marked a turning. Drought may have played a role. Overpopulation, too. Internal conflict. Trade disruptions. And perhaps the psychological weight of prophecies unfulfilled or omens misunderstood. Whatever the cause, the result was gradual, almost gentle. Stone did not crack. It softened. Ceilings did not crumble. They sagged, held aloft by roots. Glyphs blurred, not through erasure, but through rain. And the scribes, those careful guardians of history, seemed to sense that their final act would not be a record of conquest or glory, but a handoff. From human to earth, from ink to leaf. Some chose to hide their work. Codices were wrapped in cloth and placed inside jars, then sealed with wax and buried beneath floor tiles. A few have been found mildewed, mostly unreadable, but some pages remain, the ink faint but present. One such codex ends with an image of a temple, half covered in vines. The caption reads, "It returns, as it was before." Others made peace. A stele discovered near the edge of a collapsed causeway shows a scribe seated beneath a tree, brush in hand, but not writing. His scroll lies rolled beside him. He gazes at a bird perched on a branch. The glyph beside him reads, "He who listens now." It was a shift from narration to observation. From control to surrender. They did not resist the jungle. They yielded to it. Because in Maya cosmology, the jungle was not chaos. It was a god. The great green deity of life and rot, of seed and decay. To be taken by the jungle was not to be lost. It was to be absorbed into the cycle. And the scribes, who had spent their lives recording the rhythm of time, understood the meaning of that return. Still, the final inscriptions ache with awareness. A panel in Palenque's outer court bears these words, "No child was named this moon." Another, carved onto a stair in Copen, notes, "The feast was made, but no guests arrived." These were not complaints. They were facts, observations, a record of thinning. And always the jungle crept closer. Roots thickened. Figs grew from the walls. Ferns sprouted between glyphs. The wind carried seeds where once it carried chants. And beneath the green hush, the scribes closed their books. One of the last known inscriptions from the classic period was carved in 909 AD. It records a dedication, a simple act of reverence. There's no mention of war. No prediction of doom. Just a name, a date, and a phrase. Let it be known while there is light. The stone is worn, but still legible. It stands half swallowed by a tree now, bark curling around its edges. Visitors often miss it. But if you step close, you can trace the brushstrokes frozen in time. You can feel the steady hand that wrote, even as all around him, the world he knew slipped into shadow. The scribes did not stop because they were defeated. They stopped because the time of cities had ended. And they honored that ending as they had honored births, reigns, victories. With precision, with silence, with glyphs drawn so carefully that even now they hold breath. In the centuries that followed, vines claimed the rooftops. Trees sprouted through ceremonial courtyards. Capstones collapsed into loam. The walls remained, but their meanings began to fade. Without the scribes to read them, the story slept. And so too did the cities. Travelers passed through the lowlands unaware of the temples underfoot. Roots cracked the last remaining paint. Storms turned murals to watercolor. Jaguars made dens where kings once walked. The jungle did not roar. It whispered, and it waited. But something remained. Deep beneath the layers of soil and silence, the scribes had buried more than ink. They had buried continuity. Across generations, the knowledge was not entirely lost. Descendants carried the rhythms in ceremony, the stories in song, the glyphs in embroidery and drumbeat. The jungle could wrap around stone, but it could not erase memory. And eventually, memory stirred again. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers began unearthing the Maya cities. First came sketches and journals, then photographs and maps. At Tikal, workers climbed the pyramids using rope ladders hung from ceiba branches. In Palenque, they pried open tombs layered with mold, the walls within still echoing painted stories. Among the early discoveries was a broken lintel, showing a scribe seated alone, his tools beside him. His gaze is not outward, but downward, focused on a scroll that trails off the image. The glyph beside him has puzzled scholars for years. Some translate it as unfinished, others as awaiting. A few prefer, he continues, because in many ways the scribes never ended. Each glyph uncovered from the earth became a breath exhaled again. Each stele brushed free of moss, a voice returned. Archaeologists learned to read their notations, dates, births, eclipses, victories, and then slowly the more subtle messages, the metaphors, the rhythms, the pauses between words. The scribes had not only preserved history, They had preserved the cadence of thought. Restoration was slow. Many glyphs were damaged beyond recognition. Some had been carved over, others eroded entirely. But for each word lost, another emerged on a hidden wall, on a pot shard, inside a collapsed tomb. And in this emergence, the scribes began to speak again. Their language, once declared indecipherable, was decoded, glyph by glyph. It took decades, hundreds of scholars, thousands of fragments, but eventually the patterns formed a voice. And through that voice, the scribes began to tell their story again, not just of kings and wars, but of stars and sorrow, of rituals and rain. In modern times, the jungle still presses close. Walk the trails of Tickle or A.K. Balam, and you will feel the green breath of it around you. Trees lean close, vines curl, humidity clings to skin. The ruins do not resist the jungle. They live with it. And where the jungle once silenced, now it sings in tandem with rediscovery. But the scribes remain present. Their glyphs mark the stone in ways no vine can cover. Their rhythms shape our understanding of time. And every step into a temple, every quiet moment before an altar, is a conversation with those who came before. Those who chose, even in the face of abandonment, to write, to leave behind not lament, but structure. Not despair, but beauty. Not fear, but continuity. In some recently discovered texts, especially those recovered from caves into notes, there are brief, almost casual lines that refer to the jungle itself, not as an enemy or devourer, but as kin. One reads, "She is the mother of forgetting, and the root of all memory." Another, carved into a bench likely used by a scribe, "When I am gone, she will speak." And so she did. She wrapped herself around every glyph, every stele, every codex sealed in clay, not to erase, but to protect, until we returned, until we remembered, until we listened again. And the scribes, in turn, wrote not with urgency, but with faith, that someone, someday, would lift the moss, would follow the vines, would brush away the mold and pause at the shape of a symbol half buried in silence. And in that pause would hear the echo of a brush, the rustle of bark paper, the breath of a scribe steadying his hand as the world changed around him. Because endings, the Maya believed, were never final. They were folded into beginnings. Like a codex turned back to its first page. Like the shadow of a city reappearing in wave-filtered light. Like the jungle taking and giving, holding and releasing. The scribes knew. So they kept writing until the very last line. And now, as we leave the stone cities behind, as the eclipse fades and the jungle breathes again, we return quietly, gently from a world shaped by time and shadow. The Maya scribes, whose hands once trembled from ritual fasting and celestial pressure, have fallen still. Their stories now rest, tucked beneath soil and root, preserved in glyphs and whispers. You've wandered with them beneath torchlight, into the drumbeat of ceremonies, through moments where ink met blood and brush met prophecy. You've seen the temples rise in morning mist and fall again beneath the weight of vines. You've listened not to shouting kings or clashing blades, but to silence the kind that holds memory, the kind that invites sleep. And in that sleep, perhaps you carry something of them with you, a curve of a glyph that lingers behind your eyelids, the echo of a flute once made a bone, the hush of an eclipse passing over your chest like a soft breath. There are no bright endings here, no final chords, only quiet footsteps receding into moss, and the slow rhythm of time wrapping gently around you. As the scribes once did, we end not with a proclamation, but with a line softly spoken. Let it be known while there is light, and now that light dims, not in fear, not in loss. But in rest, you are safe. You are far from the noise of today, far from the schedules and the lists, far from anything that demands. You are curled inside a story carved long ago, held by stone and earth and stars. This was a world where time was not hurried, where silence had shape, where even endings were simply turned of a long, spiraling calendar. Perhaps your own thoughts now circle like that, a little slower, a little quieter. Perhaps you feel the pull of sleep, not sudden, but steady, like the tide behind the moon, gently coaxing the shore. There are still stories ahead, cities not yet uncovered, stars still waiting to be charted, but they can wait. Tonight, the scribes have finished their work, their brushes are washed, their scrolls are rolled, the sky is dark and kind. This journey, brought to you by the drowsy historian, is meant to be left unfinished so that your dreams can complete it. Let the ink fade. Let the drums fall silent. Let the jungle close the book once